Chapter 390. It's Duke Marcus? It's Duke Marcus. It's really Duke Marcus. Beastmen were very one-track-minded. They worshipped their own culture and heritage. Apart from a very small number of ambitious people, most orcs would rather fight a giant dragon than learn even a single character in another language. There were not many foreign names that ordinary beastmen could remember. 90% of beastmen didn't even know what trolls were called. They were often called skinny when they needed to. However, every beastman remembered a nightmarish name, Duke Marcus. They also remembered his blue flag with the symbol of a tornado, because this flag represented a terrifying legend that no orc hero had been able to break until now. There was only one meaning to this myth, and that was the blood of 500,000 orcs. From the Elven Forest fire, to the burning of Stormwind City, to the massacre by the battleship flying the blue Stormwind flag when crossing the sea, to the 2 meat grinder battles in South Shore, to the hinterlands being toyed with time and time again. Duque was the absolute nightmare of the beastmen. Beastmen often complained that warlocks used demonic powers. However, in the eyes of most beastmen, Duque was the true king of demons. Rumor had it that Duque had endless magic power and countless devil's hands. When he released the flames of hell, he could destroy the heavens and earth. He could blow up a planet with 1 move, and pierce through the entire universe with 2 moves. Most beastmen were illiterate anyway. The more they spread, the more unbelievable it became. If Orgrim was leading the hotheads who had just come from the Dark Portal, perhaps Orgrim would even try to trick them into testing the waters. Obviously, they weren't. They were the last elites of the Blackrock tribe, but they were also survivors who had been tortured and killed by Duque multiple times. They could kill any kingdom in the world without hesitation, or the owner of any flag, except for the owner of this flag. The former chief and great chief, Blackhand, was dead. Close to 60,000 Blackstone elites had become burial goods for Stormwind City. Even the Blacktooth clan, which had split off from the Blackrock clan, had suffered heavy casualties in the recent battle of the Earthy Highlands due to an elemental giant princess who had appeared out of nowhere. Almost all of Duque's victories were built on the pain of the Blackrock clan. In the Blackrock clan, every household had the name of Duque, which was equivalent to the god of death. The morale of the entire orc camp declined at a visible rate. All of them lowered their heads, not even daring to look at the flag. Orgrim, who had never drunk demonic blood, maintained the natural reddish-brown skin of a beastman, but now his face was ashen. He was livid at the disappointment of his fellow clansmen. His face was also ashen because of another matter. Gul'dan. Did that female long ears use the power of the storm altar? Orgrim grabbed Gul'dan in shock and asked hurriedly. Gul'dan glanced at him, then lowered his head and replied, "Correct." This time, Orgrim did not feel anger at the disappointment of his clansmen. Instead, he felt a bone-chilling coldness. It was as if in that instant, the illusory death scythe had brushed past his majestic body like an untraceable cold wind. Everything that had happened since he had landed in the hinterlands replayed in his mind like a movie. Orgrim suddenly felt like he was a clown dancing in the palm of a ghost. He had thought that it was a good move to get a new force to join him and attack the main city of the elves from thousands of miles away. Who knew that everything he had done, every step he had taken, was all within Duque's calculations. If the evidence was not obvious before, everything could be explained from the moment he deciphered the runestone. Duque also coveted the power of the runestone, but due to the good relationship between the elves and humans, he could not take the initiative to do it. So, he used the orcs to destroy the runestone first, and then took advantage of it himself. The elves did not belong to the Lordaeron alliance. No matter how many elves died, it had nothing to do with him, a human, or the alliance. So, he could watch coldly from the perspective of a bystander as hundreds of thousands of elves were slaughtered by the allied forces of the orcs and the trolls, until the elves could not take it anymore and gave in. Of course, the horde had taken all the notoriety. It was obvious that Duque had reaped all the benefits. Even though Orgrim did not know what Duque had gotten, it was clear that Duque had gotten what he wanted. That was why he had raised the flag to warn the horde. Zuluid did not seem to care and muttered, So what if that Duque is here? I don't believe he can save so many long ears by himself. Umph. Orgrim snorted coldly. Duke Marcus has nothing to do with the holy power that his monarch believes in. He can even burn down the main city of his own country. Why can't he burn down the city of the long ears when the horde attacks this one, and let us be buried with the long ears? If he could be so cruel to himself, he would definitely be even more cruel to others. This logic seemed to be accurate. It was a pity that Orgrim would never know that Duque's origins had nothing to do with Stormwind City. Orgrim felt bitter. The great chief hesitated. With regards to Duke's defensive skills, Orgrim definitely had a deep understanding of them. The cries of his compatriots who had died under the three-dimensional attacks seemed to echo in Orgrim's ears. If Orgrim had the Horde's army at hand, he would have a steady stream of orc reinforcements with the Dark Portal's supply line at his back. Perhaps Orgrim really did not believe it, and wanted to fight Duque. No matter what, destroying a race's capital was still something that boosted the morale of the race. That was under the premise that Duque did not interfere. But now, the situation had changed drastically. Originally, Orgrim thought that even if Grom Hellscream's main force could not take down the capital of the strongest human kingdom, Lordaeron, they would still be able to deal a heavy blow to the allied forces. Who would have thought that Grom's assault would be destroyed by a new flaming weapon invented by Duque? He only found out about this after he promised Zhu Jin to attack the elves and stepped into the Long Song forest. Grom could no longer rely on his own forces to break out of the encirclement, and needed his Blackrock clan. He did not have the capital to waste any more time here. Moreover, Duque's personality was one that would bite off a piece of flesh from you even if he suffered heavy losses. This gave Orgrim a headache the most. With all these factors in mind, Orgrim believed that retreating was the only option. He would never have thought that if he really wanted to fight, Silvery Moon would not be able to withstand it. Inform Zhu Jin. Retreat. The Great Chief ordered. Chapter 391. The ear-piercing sound of metal clanging rang out. Every orc lowered their shoulders as if they'd been pardoned, returning to camp with their equipment. On the city wall, every single elf had their mouths wide open in disbelief as they acted as witnesses to this miraculous scene in astonishment. They retreated just like that? An army of 100,000 had been scared off by a flag? What flag was that? By the light of the sun, could this be the flag of the legendary Titan of creation? On the city wall, the elves who didn't know what had happened were bursting with curiosity. They all looked inquisitively at General Aurelia, who'd shot the entire flag 500 meters away. Aurelia ignored their gazes and muttered to herself. He did it. He did. Windsor was the first to answer. It seems like there's nothing our new master can't do? Servanas added in a rebellious tone. Only you and Big Sis agreed to the transfer, the quietest Lilith complained. Aurelia smiled bitterly. Silly sister, we all ran, but you still didn't want to. This is bad for you. Servanas clamped Fourth Sister's neck under his arm and smirked. If you're really that unwilling, you shouldn't have followed Big Sis and me to ride chocobos across half of Silvery Moon to demonstrate to the counselors. Lilith didn't say anything, tacitly admitting that her second sister had seen through her thoughts. At that moment, the ones who were the most shocked were the counselors who were watching the live broadcast, as well as the Sun King and his son. Retreated? They retreated just like that? Although everyone could tell that the troll was unwilling, he'd still retreated in the end. Retreating with a single flag? That was retreating with a single flag. If not for the fact that the humans and orcs had been at war for more than a year, and millions of lives had been sacrificed in the war and massacre, the hatred between them would have been so intense that it couldn't be resolved. The elves would definitely think that the orcs and humans were putting on a show to trick the high elves. Of course, the unease and panic on the faces of the orc warriors couldn't lie. Now, regardless of whether Duque had used his illustrious reputation or something else to achieve it, Duque had done it. Even if the negotiations between Kuel Salis and the Alliance failed, at least Duque had helped them by the most precious time. Whether the High Elves were willing or not, the entire Kuel Salis was now in a state of war. Every 3 days, 100 groups of qualified blade throwers could be trained from the civilians who had never been in combat. 1,000 craftsmen who were engaged in other jobs could be turned into craftsmen for war machines. The structure craftsmen could produce 50 thrown arcane guards. The high elves were stunned. When they truly unearthed their combat potential, they would be able to hold on for a while longer. Of course, without Duque, they wouldn't have been able to hold on for too long. The most important reason was that the country had fallen too quickly. Nearly 50% of the citizens outside Silvermoon City had either been slaughtered or blocked by the Horde's army. When the Trolls' headhunting squad wiped out all of these resistors, the disadvantage of the elves' small population would be magnified. The few elves could not resist the Horde's army at all. At this moment, everything was different. The haze of war had not completely dissipated, but at least everyone could see the light of hope, even if that light came from a human named Duque. In the hall, the Sun King Anastrian spoke. "Sir Marcus, your reputation is so great that every eyewitness is amazed. I have to admit that although you are young, you do indeed have the ability to lead this terrible war between races. Let us use this as the basis for our negotiations." As the Sun King waved his hand, a magic device beneath Duque's feet was activated. Don't misunderstand, it was not a magic trap, but a raised platform. 1 level, 2 levels, a total of 9 levels, allowing Duque to rise to the same height as the Sun King. A rectangular table appeared between the Sun King and Duque. The Silvermoon Council's acting chairman, Morlens, could only sit next to the Sun King. On the other hand, Duque let Alucia sit next to him, acting as a clerk. With the posture set, the other counselors could only listen from a few levels lower. It seemed that they were not even qualified to speak. This was the punishment the Sun King gave to the counselors after he regained control of the country. After sitting down, Duque's first words were, "Before the negotiations officially begin, I have a small personal request." "Speak. I have great admiration for your Ranger General, Illyria Windrunner, and her Ranger family. After the war with the Beastmen, I will have a small half of the Elven Forest. Therefore, I need an excellent team of rangers to help me take care of my forest. I wonder if your Majesty is willing to part with this? A small request? I'm afraid this is your biggest goal, isn't it?" Anastrian's murky eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. "The elves are free. We allow different opinions and lifestyles. Just like how our fellow night elves could not accept our pursuit of magic more than 6,000 years ago and agreed to let us leave. For those elves who wish to live a different life, we will not be overly demanding. Thank you in advance. But I also have a small condition." Duque narrowed his eyes, his deep black pupils bursting with a look that said, "If you are too different, don't blame me for flipping the table. Speak. Before the main force of the Horde is chased out of the Long Song Forest, every Windrunner must continue to wear the badge of Cultivate Salis." Sure. Duque knew that this was the High Elves' pride at work. The Sunstrider royal family did not have a princess, so naturally there was no marriage alliance. Even if they lost face now, it was not a big deal. But if everyone knew that reinforcements were obtained by selling off their own general, how could the Sunstrider lead this country in the future? Contrary to the expectations of the Sun King and the Silvermoon Council, Duque did not put forward any harsh demands, such as territory or the large amount of magic literature and knowledge that the High Elves regarded as treasures. Instead, he put forward many things or requests that the High Elves did not understand. First, the Lordaeron Alliance urgently needed mages. After ensuring the safety of the Long Song Forest, Cultivate Salis had to send no less than 20 Morning Star mages and 5 Radiant Moon mages to form a 1,000-man team of mages to participate in the battle against the orcs. The team of mages would listen directly to the current Commander-in-Chief and Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Alliance. They would serve until the passage through which the orcs came to Azeroth, the Dark Portal, was closed. Second was technology. Duque did not ask for magic knowledge, but instead asked for a large pile of information on arcane construct guards, as well as magic crystals that could be counted in tons. Of course, this batch of crystals was a sky-high fortune for the Dalajan, but for Cultivate Salis, who owned the Sunwell and could mass-produce magic crystals, it was a drop in the bucket. Finally, there was the legal marriage and residency rights between the High Elves and humans. Chapter 392. The other counselors couldn't understand it. The old and wise Sun King understood most of it. First of all, for both public and private reasons, there seemed to be nothing wrong with mobilizing the mages. To quote Kuel Salis, "You can't possibly let Prince Kale, that's work for you, Duque, right?" Sun King immediately knew that the people Duque had taken away were all members of the Silver Moon Council. There were mages on the Alliance's side, mages on the Horde's side, and also mysterious and evil sorcerers. No one could guarantee that no one would die in battle. When more counselors died, the Sun King would naturally have a way to fill the vacancies. At that time, the parliament would definitely not be a monolithic block, and there would be great opportunities. Secondly, there were the magic crystals. Duque, of course, said that it was to make up for the consumption of the Alliance's mages in the magic war. But as for how to distribute the magic, the commander was the king of warriors, Lothar, who only knew a little about magic. Wasn't it up to Duque, who was in charge of magic in the Alliance? Finally, there was the right to marry. On the surface, it looked like Duque was doing this for his own selfish reasons. He might have a chance to marry Aurelia. However, the Sun King felt that it was not that simple. The High Elves used to boast that their bloodline was nobler than the other races, and they were not allowed to marry openly. Most of the time, they only allowed those who wanted to marry a foreign race to leave their own race. Now that Duque had broken this restriction, there must be a deeper meaning behind it. However, it was not something that the Sun King could understand. In any case, Duque didn't make things difficult for the elves on the core issue that the elves were most concerned about. This was already Duque being merciful. After all the aid from the Alliance was specified within a limited time, the leaders of both sides officially signed. That night, the Sunstrider royal family eagerly announced their decision to join the Alliance to all their citizens, as well as all the terms transparently and openly. Duque even swore to the elven citizens that the Alliance had not made any unreasonable demands. That was all. Well, his personal request was actually more important. From Duque's point of view, the Windrunner family was worth more than all of Kuel Salis. The tribe did not attack that night, so the Sun King decided to take advantage of this rare free time to hold a small party to celebrate joining the Alliance. Small only referred to the number of participants. The specifications were still off the charts. Almost all the big shots in Silver Moon City had come. Melodious music, psychedelic lighting, and especially elf-style sweet wine. In particular, when the marquises and duchesses deliberately showed off their curvaceous bodies in front of Duque, Duque deeply understood why people said that the upper class of the High Elves was rather decadent. But then again, looking at the rosy cheeks, the delicate lips, the plump snow-white skin, and the towering twin peaks, Duke almost couldn't hold them in. Dear host, these females are very much in line with your aesthetic standards, but for the sake of your safety and integrity, I must inform you that the 4 female High Elves with the surname Windrunner are watching you in a special way. Shut up. After bickering with the system elf in his own mental world, Duque saw Kale, that's coming over. Oh, that's rare. Duke, I thought you worked so hard to get father to approve the intermarriage because you wanted to get some benefits for yourself? Kale, and Duke didn't have any irreconcilable conflicts. It should be said that they didn't have any conflicts at all, so they were still considered friends in private. Duque raised his exquisite crystal wine glass. Alright, I admit that the beauties of the High Elves are definitely the most unique scenery I've seen in my life. For most High Elves, time is eternal, and only white scenery is left in the sky of history. So they seek excitement and novelty to tell themselves that they are still alive. As expected of the handsome prince who was known for being cultured and refined. Even his casual words were so philosophical and poetic. Duque smiled. Does that mean that the universe in which you are in is blurred, and everything is like a dream? Kil, that was slightly stunned. He did not expect Duque to be so cultured. After all, he had never talked to Duque in detail, and subconsciously felt that a 16-year-old youth from a commoner's background would not have good self-restraint. Kil, that smiled subconsciously. If this is a dream, then it's too bad. I hope this is just a slight low point in the long river of history. This is indeed a low point for the High Elves, as an ally of the elves for 3,000 years. And as a good friend of yours, Kale, I should do my part to help you and the High Elves rise again. Duque rarely boasted like this. Coupled with Duque's shocking achievements, this kind of empty promise seemed extra tempting. Kale, that was unusually clear-headed. Although I can't wait to see your heroism, Duque, before that, we have to at least wait for a new batch of soldiers to be trained. It's fine. In 5 days at most, our armies will be able to converge, and then we can hunt together, Duque said mysteriously. There were some things that could not be said openly. Kale, was not sure what Duque had prepared. But one thing was certain, and that was that Duque had found the Sunstrider royal family and not the Silvermoon Council as a partner. Finally getting rid of the wild bees and butterflies, it did not take Duque long to find Aurelia, who was drinking alone on a balcony not far from the banquet hall. Her gorgeous long golden hair fluttered gently in the night wind. Her exquisite and flawless facial features were like a perfect work of art. Under her thin eyelashes, the pair of green eyes that he had just glimpsed were closed, but one could still feel the charm that sucked people in. From a distance, her body was so slender that it seemed like porcelain that would shatter at a touch. She could not be considered the most perfect and beautiful. Purely from a delicate point of view, Aurelia even lost to Princess Kalia Menethil. But when he walked closer, he found that the long period of training made her figure easily outline a very sexy and wild beauty at any time. After killing so many people, there was naturally a faint murderous aura. This aura naturally made Aurelia a special existence that most people could only look at from afar and not play with. But to Duque, she exuded a breathtaking charm. It was such a beautiful woman who seemed to have walked out of the legends of bards, a mixture of wild and noble beauty, who had an indescribable desolation on her face at this moment. A gust of wind blew, and Aurelia turned her head, her green eyes staring at Duque. Do you know? Sometimes I wonder if I can continue to live in a dream called Supreme Glory of the High Elves if I kill you, and I don't have to bear the pain of leaving my compatriots and country. Chapter 393. Kill me and I'll resurrect too. Duque thought quietly in his heart. Duque sighed softly. The world has changed. If I don't open my eyes, I'll only fall into the deepest despair the moment I wake up. It's not too late, Aurelia. You can still regret it. Regret what? Regret that I didn't see the Silvermoon Council's true colors earlier? Or regret that I served you? What a joke. I, Aurelia Windrunner, never regret what I do. Illyria wasn't wearing her ranger uniform. She was only wearing a pure white evening dress. On the surface, she looked like a gentle and pleasant beauty, but in reality, she was a heroine as fierce as a storm. At some point, Aurelia was already leaning on Duque's shoulder, who was wearing a blue and white evening gown. Because Duque had grown taller, Aurelia was now slightly lower than Duque's head. She snuggled up to Duque, and even when Duque consciously hugged her waist, she didn't feel uncomfortable at all. It was as harmonious as a perfect painting. Duque said lightly, "It's good that you don't regret it, little rascal. Not regretting it doesn't mean you're not sad or in pain." After a pause, Aurelia continued, "Don't move, just let me lean on you for a while." The two snuggled up to each other, enjoying the warmth from each other and the warm feeling of their souls merging. After an unknown period of time. "Hey, Duque, what will happen to Azeroth in the future?" Duque looked up at the starry sky with a deep expression. His gaze seemed to have transcended the void, transcended history, and arrived at a certain node in the future. Duque's voice was ethereal and dreamy. "The Burning Legion has made a move again. Even if I don't want to admit it, beating Sargeras into the bottomless abyss isn't the end. In 5 years at the earliest, or 10 years at the latest, the Burning Legion will definitely make a bigger move. At that time, we might need all the races to work together to get through this." Aurelia's whole body trembled, and the 3 beautiful figures who had been eavesdropping on the tree not far away also trembled. The Windrunner sisters recalled all of Duque's miracles. That kind of prophecy of the highest level, like a charlatan, gave each of them a strange premonition. It was as if their fates would be tightly linked to Duque's future. He gently stroked Aurelia's soft golden hair. But before that, I promise you that I will make the culprit behind the massacre of the High Elves, Zhu Jin, pay the most tragic price. At that moment, Duque felt Aurelia's fingers tighten around him. Those fingers that looked like tender white jade suddenly turned into the sharpest dragon's claws. The great force that came from those fingers made Duque's shoulder feel a little pain. "I'm sorry." Aurelia suddenly came to her senses and apologized. "It's okay." Duque silently added the fitness option to his growth plan. "Should I get a battle mage subclass?" Almost at the same time, Zhu Jin, who was in the tribe's main camp, felt his mind go blank. The tribe has done enough for the trolls. Now it's time for the trolls to fulfill their promise and serve the tribe. I need the trolls to obey orders and follow us to attack the humans' capital. Zhu Jin thought that he was hearing things. However, the serious expressions of Orgrim and the other tribe chiefs told him that they were not joking. The hatred accumulated over the generations, the voices and smiles of the trolls who had died tragically, all of this seemed to naturally appear in his mind. He almost didn't think, and subconsciously smashed the table in front of him, shouting, "Don't worry, I'll kill you." Betrayal. This is the tribe's betrayal to the trolls. A ray of black light shot out from the Troll King's palm, almost splitting Orgrim's hideous face in half. It was a battle axe. A battle axe that had been strengthened by the power of storms. Kargath Bladefist, the chieftain of the Shattered Palm clan, swung the blade attached to his arm like lightning, instantly knocking away the battle-axe that Zhu Jin had thrown. The battle-axe that flew away hit the largest support of the huge tent. With a loud bang, a gust of wind shot out from the axe. Under the impact of the wind, the huge tent that was made of animal skin was torn into pieces by the huge force, flying everywhere in an instant. The turbulence caused by the wind instantly sent a few of the personal guards stationed near the chieftain's tent flying. One of them even crashed into a huge stone pillar beside the tent, almost causing him to cry out in pain. However, the loyal personal guard did not have the time to complain. He ignored the pain in his back that felt like all the bones in his body had been broken, and crawled up from the ground. As he rushed towards the tent, he shouted, "Enemy attack!" The chieftain's tent was attacked. In less than a second, the entire tribe's camp was in an uproar. "It's okay. Calm down. All of you, calm down." Orgrim's thunderous roar temporarily calmed the crowd down. When the gigantic tent collapsed, revealing the panting Zhu Jin and the cold-looking Kargath, who had raised the sharp blade in his arm, all of them realized that the trolls and the horde seemed to have fallen apart. Zhu Jin was not alone. Besides Zhu Jin, there were also a few chieftains from different clans. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Zhu Jin was a small chieftain of the tribe. When Zhu Jin got into a fighting stance, they naturally took out their weapons. Originally, the beastmen and trolls had already set up camp together, and there were no fences separating them. Now that there was such a sudden turn of events, everyone was dumbfounded. They picked up their weapons, not knowing whether they should attack or not. "Orgrim, you liar. We agreed to conquer the entire world together. The beastmen wanted the plains and mountains, and the trolls wanted all the forests." Zhu Jin excitedly waved his long and powerful arms, roaring loudly. "The tribe did not lie to you. This is our final goal. However, in the contract, we wrote that the tribe will help you defeat the main forces of the High Elves, and the trolls will take their final revenge." It was clearly written in the contract. Orgrim took out the contract and raised it up high. The tribe has killed a total of 70,000 High Elves in the 2 battles. In reality, you trolls have also killed more than 100,000 High Elven civilians. The tribe has fulfilled its promise. But this is not enough. Those long-eared Silvery Moon City are still here. But why did the beastmen retreat when they saw the blue war flag today? No, the main point is not the war flag. The main point is that we have received the latest news. The tribe's other army of 200,000 beastmen has been obstructed and surrounded in the Silvery Pine Forest. We need to quickly conquer the capital of a human kingdom, reduce the pressure on them, and rescue them. Orgrim tried to cover up everything by saying that it was a strategic need. From a strategic point of view, Orgrim's choice was undoubtedly correct. Chapter 394. After all the chiefs agreed that Duque was using the Horde to weaken the High Elves. If the Horde dared to attack Silvery Moon, Duque would dare to burn the city again. Even if it was a perfect misunderstanding, and even if Duque wanted to burn the city, the elves would not allow it. But the Horde did not know. An alliance that had not been broken for 2,800 years. It sounded grand, didn't it? The Horde was a different race and lacked information. Who knew about the petty conflicts between the humans and the elves? In the end, all the chiefs thought that rather than wasting their elites on the elves, who could not harm the humans, it was better to send troops to attack the humans' vital cities. It was a pity that a very intelligent beastman leader met a great demon leader who only knew how to act based on emotions and had long since been blinded by hatred. The result was destined to be a tragedy. No. The trolls will not recognize this alliance written in the common human language. It's full of word games. As long as the Horde fights with the trolls, we will still be brothers. We will still be brothers. Zhu Jin raised his remaining battle axe and roared. Orgrim felt aggrieved. There was no direct translation between the troll and beastman languages. The only way to communicate was in the common human language. Zhu Jin, how could you just destroy an alliance written in the common human language? Orgrim was furious. To be honest, the beastmen were not a race with a good temper. I, Orgrim, am the chief of the Horde. I have to consider the interests of the entire Horde, not the trolls. Do you think that if there is a single high elf who is still alive, I will have 50,000 elites accompany you trolls to kill the last elf? Yes, that's right. This is the only way you can show your sincerity. This is the only way you are qualified to be the trolls' allies. Zulud suddenly stepped forward and swept away all the obstacles between him and Zhu Jin. I repeat on behalf of the chief, the Horde does not only have trolls. We have beastmen, ogres, goblins, death knights. The trolls do not have the right to ask the entire Horde to be their fighters. Without the support of the Horde, you trolls are only fit to be rats in the depths of the forest. You can't even step into the Long Song forest. Zhu Jin's face turned red at Zulahid's blunt humiliation. Rats? How dare you call the people of the great Amani Empire rats? No existence could insult the giant demons. No, Zulahid. Kneel down and apologize to the ancestors of the giant demons. Apologize? Never. The trolls can't do anything without the orcs. Why should the brave orcs apologize? This time, Zulud was furious, and he whistled. A huge adult dragon suddenly soared into the sky from the back of the camp. Even if it was unwilling, it would let Zhu Jin know what a dragon's breath was as long as Zuluhid gave the order. Zuluhid, this is your last chance. If you don't kneel down and apologize, I'll use the wind to cut off your legs and make you kneel forever. Zhu Jin waved his axe. Bastard. Think about it, if we hadn't built the storm altar for you. Where did you get the power of the storm? Zulud pulled out his warhammer and blasted. Enough. It's enough. Do you really want to fight here and let the humans and elves on the walls laugh at us? Orgrim rushed in between the two and smashed his hammer into the ground. Sand flew everywhere, and a huge circular pit with a diameter of more than 3 meters appeared. Everyone could feel the frightening power of the great chief. For a moment, the whole place was silent. However, the tense atmosphere did not ease at all. Orgrim saw that the ogres and orcs, who had always been close to each other, were now standing in 2 distinct lines. They held their weapons in their hands and looked at each other nervously. Orgrim suddenly realized that the honeymoon period between the Horde and the giant demons had ended the moment Duque's war flag appeared. Orgrim recited the nightmarish name with the greatest hatred in his heart. Duke Marcus, is this your plan? Is this what you wanted to see? Very well. I, Orgrim, will remember your treachery. Orgrim gritted his sharp teeth, and suddenly looked up at Zhu Jin, his eyes like lightning. Wake up, Zhu Jin. The war between the giant demons and the elves has lasted for 6,000 years. In these 6,000 years, neither of you have completely destroyed the other. It is not easy to destroy the other in a short period of time. In order to destroy an intelligent race, it would take a long time and many victories, little by little. The giant demons have won enough this time. As long as the giant demons remain in the horde, we will destroy all the elves, humans, and dwarves, and dominate this planet. Orgrim's earnest guidance could not be said to be without good intentions. If it were another clear-headed leader with a higher level of intelligence, perhaps he would have listened. Unfortunately, revenge and the consecutive victories had caused Zhu Jin's originally low intelligence to fall to the same level as a retard. He decisively refused. There's no need. The giant demons are ashamed to be associated with a tribe that was scared away by a flag. Zhu Jin raised the remaining axe in his hand and shouted, "Giant demons! We don't need to rely on the cowardly orc tribe. We can destroy Silvery Moon City ourselves." The hearts of the giant demons were stirred up by Zhu Jin's provocative declaration. They immediately raised their weapons and let out a heaven-shaking roar. Their spears were like a forest, and it really did look like that. Zhu Jin didn't care about Orgrim and the others' reactions. He just led the troll chieftains away. "Idiot! Don't you think that without us, they wouldn't even have the right to step into the Eternal Song Forest?" Zulu Hid scolded. "What should we do?" Kargith Bladefist asked. "Go." And as soon as possible, Orgrim picked up the map that had fallen to the ground and drew a circle on it. Finally, it landed on a name. "We'll go like this and then go here." The tribe chiefs thought for a while and finally nodded. Back at Silvery Moon City, at the banquet hall, Duque reluctantly let go of Aurelia. "Duque, rest early. Perhaps tomorrow will be a bitter battle. After all, there are at least 4 days before your reinforcements arrive." "Bitter battle? What bitter battle?" Duque pretended to be ignorant. "What do you mean? The High Elves can't defeat the orcs, ogres, goblins, and giant demons, but can't they defeat a group of giant demons who don't even know how to break through magic?" Duque replied with a faint smile. "Oh, if this is true, then this is definitely the best news I've heard since Kuel Salis was invaded." The one who replied was not Aurelia, but Prince Kale, who had unknowingly appeared in the corridor a few meters away. Chapter 395. Raising his hand, the prince bowed apologetically. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation. I just happened to hear it when I came over." Aurelia shrugged, indicating that she had already sensed it. "It's okay. I don't mind." The prince immediately asked anxiously, "Is this the hunt you were talking about?" "If I'm not wrong, my appearance was enough to make the chief of the tribe, Orgrim, give up on attacking Silver Moon City and ask the trolls to leave with the tribe. But Orgrim obviously underestimated the trolls' hatred, madness, and stubbornness towards the elves. So the division of the tribe is almost inevitable. At the earliest, the main force of the tribe will leave tonight, leaving only the trolls to continue attacking Silver Moon City." Duque's words made the eyes of the prince, Aurelia, and the 3 windrunners in charge of eavesdropping immediately brighten. "Really? 1 man and 4 women, 5 voices almost at the same time. F***CK, Illyria was his rumored girlfriend. Forget about his rumored future sisters-in-law eavesdropping, they even gave themselves away together. What the hell was this?" Duque was very embarrassed. Duque could only pretend that he was not talking about love and communicating with Aurelia. With a businesslike expression, he raised the wine glass that he had placed on the balcony railing. "The hunt. Consider it a small gift from me and Kale. That's as a witness of friendship." "Awesome. Too awesome." That's eyebrows almost stretched to the side of the door frame in joy. Of course, this was an exaggerated figure of speech. Don't believe it. But the prince's joy was not simple. Kale, had lived for more than 1,000 years, and he had also been an idiot for more than 1,000 years. He had always been a perfectionist, and he had always lived in the gap between responsibility and glory. He was afraid that if he did not do well, he would not be able to be a role model for the elves. So Kale, that's had always been more demanding of himself than a Virgo's perfectionist creed. Ever since his army was defeated, he had been under too much pressure. Even if he did not want to listen or ask, he could still hear the criticism of his subjects from time to time and feel the resentful gazes of the families of the fallen. Those were the lives of 20,000 high elves. Just like that, the hopes of the clansmen were destroyed by him. Perhaps he could use various objective circumstances to explain this defeat. But to him, Kale, this was the worst first battle he had ever had. A defeat was a defeat. No matter what explanation he used, this was a stain that he, Kale, could not erase. A stain that would accompany him for life. For the past few days, he had been trying his best to cheer himself up, comforting and encouraging himself. However, his mental exhaustion was getting worse. He really didn't know when the mountain-like mental pressure would crush him. Just when he felt that he couldn't take it anymore and was about to collapse, Duque actually said that he would give him a great credit, even if he knew that Duque would get the most credit. But his heart couldn't help but jump for joy. That's right. Even if it was a victory without doing anything, it was 10,000 times better than not winning. On the other side, Aurelia also tactfully resolved the prince's embarrassment. His Highness Kale, is an excellent prince. Unfortunately, the situation forced him to put an excessive burden on his shoulders too early. If it was done step by step, His Highness would definitely do better. That previous battle was a pity. To let a dumb guy with no military experience. Dumb guy? Kale, was puzzled by this title. Duque, this bastard, was seriously making up a big truth that even he didn't believe. In my hometown, it's customary to add the word the to the first word of a man's name to form a nickname for him. That's why I'm used to calling Kale, dumb guy. Sorry, if you don't like it, I can. No. I like the title, dumb guy, very much. Kale, voluntarily entered the dumb guy mode. Please go back to the previous topic. Well, even the gods couldn't save him. Why do humans have knight candidates and reserve soldiers? It's the same logic. To suddenly let a dumb guy who has never commanded an army command 20,000 people, to be honest, it's not your fault. It's the council that forced you to take the position of commander. That's frowned slightly. But Duque, you don't seem to have any battlefield experience before? No. I do. When I first became an earth mage, I commanded a dozen mercenaries to deal with the gnolls. Then it was the fishmen and the nagas. Then I led the most experienced Sir Lothar and more than 200 elites to raid Karazhan. Then I organized the defense of a district in Stormwind City. Duque continued to speak the big truth with a serious face. Duque had indeed climbed up step by step, but his miraculous performance in suppressing the tribes was all because he was familiar with history as a transmigrator. Anyway, it was enough to fool the inexperienced Kale, Aurelia didn't think there was anything wrong with it. So, dumb guy, what you need the most now is a mentor who can give you actual combat experience and guide you to deal with the tense situation in front of you and achieve victory. That's right. That person is your brother, me, Duque. It sounded very mysterious and full of a sense of deception. Unfortunately, Duque's battle record was too frightening, and the momentum of repelling an army with one flag was too awesome. Kale, had to believe it. If there was anything that overwhelmed his last bit of hesitation, it was undoubtedly the good news from the messenger. Your Highness. Good news. There was an internal strife in the tribe just now. The main force of the tribe, mainly orcs, is withdrawing from the camp. Only the trolls are left. And the others were all shocked. Kill, looked at Duque again, his eyes filled with almost fanatical worship. Duque revealed a mysterious smile. What did I just say? Kale, completely ignored it. He directly bowed his head and said in the most humble tone, Duque, Mentor Marcus, please teach me how to win a battle. Duque hurriedly helped Kale, up. There's no need for honorifics. I'm your friend, so it's not a problem for me to give you some pointers. As long as you listen to me, I guarantee that you'll get rid of your decadence. Really? The first thing you have to do is wait for the main force of the tribe to leave. Then, before my reinforcements arrive, just rely on the elven troops to deal a heavy blow to the troll main force. What? Kale, that's immediately lost his voice. Please, have some confidence in yourself, okay? You're now facing a troll army that, except for a few leaders, doesn't know magic at all and can't fight against magic. Didn't you high elves use magic to oppress the trolls for thousands of years? What you did in the past, just do it now. I'll teach you how to deal with the powerhouses on the other side. Duque patiently guided. Oh no, patiently instructed the dumb guy. Chapter 396. How did Kale, that's become an out-and-out rich man in history, from a handsome prince who was loved by everyone, had flat tires, and admired by tens of thousands of people, he had become a villain boss that everyone wanted to kill. Even his own people didn't like him, and everyone wanted him dead. This was a very long and complicated story. Of course, this could be attributed to many objective factors. For example, when Kale, that's took over the High Elves' blame, it was during the destruction of Kuel Salis, the destruction of Silver Moon City, and the death of his father and the Silver Moon Council. As the only high-ranking member who survived, Kale, that's had no choice but to come out and carry the flag. The times could create heroes. Kale, that's really had an indomitable will, he might really be hero material. Unfortunately, not every hero was called Lothar, and not every hero had the will, strength, and luck to restore the country. The biggest reason why Kale, that could not rise again from the righteous path was his lack of willpower. In the first half of his life, he had not suffered any setbacks at all. He also wanted to work hard and deal with the challenges. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions of the council on the royal power, the council spared no effort to obstruct Kale, that's growth. Even though Kale, that's had practiced powerful magic, he was still a prince who was like a flower in a greenhouse. On the surface, he looked perfect, but in fact, he was very easy to fool. This was why he had led his people away from the righteous path, because of a small conspiracy and a small trick by Queen Naga Vashch. Duque had guessed correctly. At this moment, Kale, that was definitely under a lot of pressure. Those who are capable must lead their people to stand up and fight. This is an unshirkable responsibility of the Sunstrider royal family. You are the only heir of the Sunstrider. You must bear this responsibility. Anastrian's strict teachings had made Kale, that's feel like he was walking on a single log bridge connecting two cliffs for a long time. This failure and the death of 20,000 troops had directly broken the single log bridge in Kale, that's heart. However, at the moment when Kale, that was about to fall into the abyss of his soul, if someone inadvertently or intentionally extended a helping hand, they would receive a compromise from the bottom of their heart. Just like that, Kale, that's dominance and influence over the High Elves was unknowingly stolen by Duque. In reality, Kale, that's had completed a spiritual escape with a joyful and relieved state of mind. Perhaps he didn't realize it now, but once he encountered a similar desperate situation in the future, Kale, that would unknowingly trust Duque and become dependent on Duque. The system genie jumped out. Host, I have to say, you are really despicable, and shameless. Shut up. In history, because a certain Grand Marshal of the Alliance was an idiot, most of the High Elves went to the tribe and became the most attractive people in the tribe. Before Duque's transmigration, more than 40% of the Horde players were Blood Elves who were descended from the High Elves. From this, it could be seen that the Blood Elves were the only scenery in the tribe where most races were vicious and affected the appearance of the city. The High Elves had all kinds of bad habits and arrogant habits, but Duque still didn't want to leave the High Elves to the tribe. Duque was trying hard to bluff Kale, that's trying to keep the High Elves from going astray. Of course, in the eyes of Aurelia and her sisters, Duque could be said to be great. The next day, the main force of the tribe really withdrew. Wash your necks and prepare to die. Despicable long ears. The Amani clan will become your grave diggers. Hurry up and surrender. This way we can at least give you a quick death." The trolls shouted as they continued to torture and kill the elven captives. Kale, that's had the urge to stuff a pyroblast into Zhu Jin's mouth as he looked at the giant demon army, which was small in number but still arrogant and clamoring non-stop. Duque reminded Kale, "That's, calm down. If you lead the army and rush down now, you can at most kill a few thousand trolls. The remaining trolls will either quickly return to the embrace of the tribe, or they will run around the entire Long Song forest and continue killing your people. But even if you go down immediately, you still won't be able to save those people with axes on their necks. Their deaths are not your responsibility, but the Silver Moon Council's." Duque didn't even blink as he diverted Kale, that's anger. "All right, we'll follow your suggestion, Duque. We'll show the enemy that we're weak." Just half an hour ago, Kale, that's as the chief commander of the city defense, had personally announced Duque's suggestion, "Show the enemy that we're weak." Before the orc army of Orgrim rolled out of the Long Song forest, they definitely couldn't hurt the troll army. Thus, the following scene happened. The gates of Silver Moon City opened, and hundreds of giant arcane guards over 5 meters tall and weighing over 5 tons charged out under the control of the mages. Following the arcane guards was Aurelia's rangers. Arcane guards. The trolls had no lack of experience fighting against these giant magical creatures. In fact, the Amani trolls all knew the terror of these giant constructs. But today, something seemed different. A mossy troll raised a giant warhammer and roared, dodging the arcane guard's huge fist, and smashed the arcane guard's bluish-purple arm joint. Apart from the core being powered by magic, the arcane guard's entire body was made of high-strength metal. It was especially difficult to destroy it with physical attacks. But this time, when the heavy hammer hit its arm, it actually let out a shrill sound of metal colliding with metal. The hammer bounced off, and the giant metal arm let out a series of unbearable sounds. Just as the troll was dumbfounded, the arcane guard's entire arm fell off. Long Ear's best arcane toys have all been destroyed by the orcs. Jaren, who was controlled by the orcs, had indeed destroyed many arcane guards. The trolls instinctively thought that the high elves were at their wits' end. On the other side, Zhu Jin also personally entered the fray. Wielding 2 giant axes, his storm combo was so fast that after a series of clanging sounds, the 7 axes hit the same spot one after another. The last axe finally chopped off the head of an arcane guard that was in good condition, deeply embedding the axe into the central circuit of the arcane guard. A burst of purplish-blue sparks that were unique to the arcane construct burst out, and the arcane guard let out an unintelligible mechanical sound, followed by a series of cracking sounds, and the entire arcane guard fell apart. Chapter 397. In the forest not far from the battlefield in front of Silvery Moon, a few orc scouts were watching the scene unfold before them. The mystics of the horde were mainly warlocks, with shamans as support. All the twin-headed ogre mages were pure elemental attack mages, unlike the humans in the Dalajan kingdom, who had spent more than 2,000 years to develop a complete magic civilization. The horde did not have magical communication. In terms of sending messages, they were still in the era of running and messengers. No one in the horde felt that there was a problem. In fact, Orgrim was already very satisfied with the addition of the Red Dragon to the team of messengers. Now, these scouts quickly got what they wanted. When the scouts caught up to Orgrim, they reported to the chief how the High Elves had easily and effectively sent the unsteady arcane guards to their deaths, and how the High Elven Rangers had accurately dodged the rain of javelins that were almost invisible to the naked eye. In the end, the trolls had won the battle. Orgrim let out a long sigh. Someone will have to pay a terrible price for their stupidity. Before it was us, now it's the trolls. But at least I can confirm that Silvery Moon is indeed under Duque's command. The chieftains who were walking slowly beside Orgrim all nodded their heads, as if saying yes. Duke's expression of approval was that's King Sinister. If the elves had heavily injured the trolls after the horde's main force had retreated, Zhu Jin might have woken up and come back pitifully to the horde. That way, even if Zhu Jin was useless, he could still bring 20 to 30,000 trolls who were good at throwing javelins. Unfortunately, Duque did not give Orgrim the chance. As long as the orcs did not leave, Duque would suppress the high elves and not lay a hand on the trolls. Didn't the trolls want to win? Here, I'll send you some useless toys to dismantle every day to fool those silly trolls into thinking that I can really win. But the horde could not wait. Orgrim did not know how long Dogrum Hellscream could last. Moreover, Duque's reinforcements had already started to enter Longsong Forest. They maintained a safe distance of at least 150 kilometers from the main force of the tribe and took a detour from the west side of the forest towards Silvermoon City. It wasn't that Orgrim didn't think of ambushing the reinforcements, but when he found out that Duque had managed to bring Stormwind's fleet to the west coast of Longsong Forest, he knew that the horde had no chance here. Between the orc army and the human reinforcements, there was still an army of early warning robots that covered the mountains and plains. In the worst-case scenario, if the human reinforcements were really ambushed by the horde, they could still retreat to the sea under the cover of the cannons of the warships. Who said that your tribe doesn't have sea power? Duke Marcus, how great would it be if you were an orc? Orgrim muttered to himself. He then raised his head and said without turning his head, "Let's go. One day, we will conquer the entire world. When that time comes, every human, elf, and dwarf will have to crawl under the feet of the orcs." Even though the Battle of Quell, the loss gave Orgrim the feeling that it started anticlimactic, but the humans' use of tactics and strategies, especially Duke's military tactics, seemed to have opened a door to a wider field for him, and Orgrim felt that he had benefited a lot from it. Orgrim was not the only one who had benefited greatly. Kale was the same. For 3 consecutive days, Kale, listened to the rangers' report on the retreat of the orcs while watching the trolls' monkey show. Not only Kale, but even the high elves guarding the city began to feel a sense of superiority. It had to be said that the trolls had put in a lot of effort to attack the city. The horde had indeed left all the siege tools for the trolls, but there were many things that the trolls couldn't handle. For example, Galen's giant siege vehicles that were at least 10 to 8 meters tall. With these iron siege vehicles that looked like giant wheels, Silvermoon City's 15-meter-tall, seemingly tall city walls were as fragile as building blocks. If it were the trolls, they wouldn't even budge. The trolls could only use some more conventional siege weapons. Unfortunately, every time they got close to the city walls, Silvermoon City would open the gates and release the dogs, the arcane guards, to counterattack. Regardless of how many there were, the arcane guards worked well. They looked intimidating enough. The 4 Windrunner sisters and the Silvermoon Council members were also on the city walls. If the trolls dared to attack the city, the elves would dare to massacre them. In any case, the elves only defended and did not attack. They held out for 3 whole days. On the morning of the 3rd day, it was time for the final battle. Countless small teams of soldiers came out of Silvermoon City's barracks. They quietly passed through the streets and alleys, forming a torrent. They practically filled all the streets, alleys, squares, and roads near the south gate of Silvermoon City. In the widest square, the most elite Imperial Guards were lined up in a few huge square formations. At the front of the square formation, there were 3 neat rows of arcane guards that were completely different from the previous 3 days. They were bigger and more majestic. In front of the arcane guards, there were a lot of thick armor with long steel spikes for collisions. The arcane guards had completely become war machines, and not the guards that the arcanists used to guard their homes. And the nimble elven rangers covered the roofs of almost all the houses on the side of the square. Originally, none of the high-level elves approved of Kale, risky counterattack. Even though the main orc force had left, there were still more than 50,000 trolls outside. Even more trolls heard the news and swarmed over from all over the Lordaeron continent to participate in this revenge against the High Elves. But when Duque secretly brought a Nastrian and Kale, to a forest to the west of Silvermoon City, the Sunstrider father and son immediately understood Duque's intentions. The 800 Griffin Knights led by the Wildhammer Dwarf King, Kudrin, was the greatest insurance. If anything really happened, these griffins could definitely come out at the critical moment to teach the trolls a lesson. Wasn't this kind of easy victory the best way to restore the reputation of the Sunstrider Wang family? Leaving a few trusted aides by Kudrin's side to act as liaisons and surveillance, the Sun King brazenly pushed for this great counterattack. The rhythmic sound of the elven horns stunned Zhu Jin, who was preparing to attack the city. The gates of Silver Moon City opened once again. Unlike the previous few times, as if afraid that the trolls would take the opportunity to rush in, only one gate was opened. This time, all 7 gates were opened. Like water slowly overflowing a dam, the High Elves' torrent rushed out of Silver Moon City. Every troll was dumbfounded. Chapter 398. The first to bear the brunt were the modified arcane guards. The trolls began to doubt their eyes when they saw the arcane guards that were completely different from the elves. The elven arcane guard had soft curves all over its body. Apart from its huge fists, when the arcane guard was motionless, it looked like a huge sculpture. The modified arcane guards were filled with a primitive and barbaric style. Their arms, elbows, shoulders, chests, calves, and knees were all covered with hard steel spikes that were at least half a meter long or sharp crescent-shaped blades. He had completely become a killing machine. The arcane constructs at the very front completely ignored all of the trolls' projectiles. The metal javelins and catapults bounced off as soon as they hit the trolls. The hammer-dismantling Gundam, that had worked thousands of times before, could not find a place to attack now. A few brave trolls charged forward, but the charging elves did not even spare them a glance. Every elf stared at the trolls as if they were idiots. That was the truth. The sledgehammers were stuck in the dense spikes of the arcane guards. It was wishful thinking to hit the joints. As a result, the trolls were directly hit by the arcane guards. They were definitely lucky to be sent flying with a few broken ribs and vomiting blood. The ones who suffered the most were those who were nailed to the calves of the arcane guards like pieces of beef waiting to be barbecued. They were neither dead nor alive. The trolls' powerful healing ability made them unable to die for a long time. Their bodies were hooked by the slightly curved spikes and could not be pulled out at all. With every step the arcane guard took, the wounds on his body tore open, and he let out a tragic wail. If the giant beast Golem or the agile twin-headed ogre warriors were still here, they could at least rely on the brute force of these non-human monsters to forcefully resist the arcane guards with their strength and heavy weapons. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. The trolls were generally more than 2 meters tall. In front of these huge magical and mechanical creatures, they were as laughable as ants. No, Zhu Jin's subordinate, Narrated, roared. As one of the best who had undergone the transformation of the Storm Altar, Narrated had obtained a transformation ability similar to that of a druid. With a roar that sounded like it came from ancient times, he turned into a giant bear that was more than 6 meters tall and weighed at least 5 tons. The giant bear was charging. It was an unscientific combat technique based on the warrior's charge skill. The huge and sharp bear claws dug a deep ravine on the ground that was deep enough to fit a person's calf. The huge and exaggerated figure left a stream of light on the ground. Wild assault. Using its extraordinarily thick fur, Narak's bare paw smashed the spikes and blades on the arcane guard's body before smashing the arcane construct's joints. After the giant arcana guard collapsed, it seemed to be struggling to get up. In the blink of an eye, the giant bear had smashed the arcana technique core with its claws. On the city wall, Kale, that's frowned. Duque's voice rang in the prince's ear. Let Saladre and Segunar go up with 2 healers. Send a team of elite rangers or mages to take care of the rest. Kale, that's did as he was told, and the effect was immediate. Narrated, who had a particularly powerful impact, was immediately restrained. The prince's 2 strong hands were just in time to restrain Narrated. At this time, another troll that could summon hurricanes and lightning appeared. He was Eichelson, who had the resounding nickname of Eagle God. He destroyed 3 arcana guards with a powerful lightning strike, and then summoned hurricanes that easily swept away a large number of elven soldiers. Kale, that's face twitched as he looked at the soldiers who were sent flying into the sky and blasted into charcoal by the terrifying lightning strike. Duque snapped his fingers and summoned Aurelia and Cervanus. Duque's instructions were simple and violent. Stand in the eye of the storm and shoot everything that has nothing to do with the elves. On the battlefield, rescue was like putting out a fire. Every moment of delay was the loss of dozens of lives. The Windrunner sisters leaped from the top of the high city wall and glided into the battlefield. After 7 or 8 quick and agile jumps, they faced off against Eichelson. Next, a few of Zhu Jin's subordinates who had been strengthened by the storm altar acted for the first time. However, after a short period of viciousness, Duque gave the prince a few pointers, and those guys were restrained. At this time, the way Kale, that's looked at Duque changed. Duque's foresight was not enough to describe Eichelson. His earth-shattering power of observation was not enough to describe him. The kind of penetrating power that could see through the enemy's weakness with a glance. This made Kale, that's admire him greatly. A feeling of worship grew wildly in the heart of the Sunstrider prince. Kaizi, this is actually not a big deal. Actually, after Aurelia told me that Ghoul Dan destroyed the runestone, I rushed to the scene. After some research, I had already deduced 80% of the opponent's skills and strength, and had already thought of a countermeasure. The response I made after seeing it on the battlefield was just a supplement to what I've been thinking these past few days. Dude, I admire you. You don't need to admire me. You can do this too. As long as you are good at observation and thinking, you will be able to discover many things that you have been ignoring before. As long as you make more complete preparations than the enemy, the scales of victory will naturally tilt towards your side during the confrontation on the battlefield. I have learned from you. Kill, that's bowed deeply to Duque. Duque gladly accepted it. The trolls had always been at a disadvantage when fighting against the elves. After the experts strengthened by the storm altar were restrained, the trolls were once again at their wits' end. The scattered spears thrown at the elven troops were mostly blocked by the ferocious arcane guards at the front. Less than 10% of the spears were thrown at the back. Even if a few elves fell occasionally, the soldiers at the back would immediately fill in the gaps. The enemies in front of them seemed endless, causing Zhu Jin to feel a sense of helplessness. In terms of numbers, the trolls definitely had the upper hand. However, when hundreds of arcane guards lined up in a row and pressed down with an earth-shattering momentum, it felt like the elves had become a true army. Although the trolls did not put down their weapons and escape, they could not help but retreat uncontrollably. They wanted to retreat from the plains in front of Silvery Moon back into the Long Song Forest. At least the complex terrain there could stop the huge arcane guards' charge. At least there, they did not need to face the astonishing momentum that could make the earth tremble. Chapter 399. The trolls are about to escape. Kale, that's reminded him. Taking the Amani trolls as an example, one of the reasons why the elves hadn't been able to exterminate them for thousands of years was that forest trolls were natural forest killers. This was especially true for someone like Zhu Jin. As long as he didn't want to be caught, he wouldn't be caught. As long as he didn't want to be caught, then even if the best rangers in Kuel Salis were sent to hunt him down, they wouldn't be able to catch him. Before Duque's crazy and unreasonable Yao Yao army appeared, the war in the forest was a battle between trolls and elven rangers. For thousands of years, neither could completely overwhelm the other. Often, when there were too many trolls, they would rush out of the depths of the forest and seek death. When the trolls were killed, they would immediately scram back into the forest to recuperate. This kind of tug-of-war had been going on for thousands of years. Prince Kale, that had also heard of the power of the Yao Yao. In terms of early warning, the Yao Yao was indeed powerful. Unfortunately, this annoying little fellow was too slow. In a full-speed pursuit, the Yao Yao was useless. Again, it was easy to break up and defeat trolls, but difficult to annihilate trolls. Compared to the sacrifice of nearly 200,000 soldiers and civilians, defeating a troll army that had lost the support of the orcs was far from enough to satisfy the elves' hatred. Kill, that was anxious. Duque shook his head leisurely. The way of a commander, in addition to looking at the overall situation and making the most beneficial choices for one's side, is to learn to read people and learn to wholeheartedly believe in experts who are proficient in certain areas. Experts? Everyone has their own strengths. Duque pointed at the fighting Sagunar. Brave and ruthless, the vanguard. Duque then pointed at Aurelia, who didn't forget to command and coordinate the four sides in the fierce battle. Able to fight and control, the general. Duque finally pointed at himself. Able to complete special tasks at special times and places, the specialist. With that, Duque chanted a string of incantations. When Kale, that's first heard it, he instinctively felt that it was very familiar, because it was the incantation to activate the runestone array buried under Longsong Forest. However, when he listened carefully, he felt that something was amiss. From the middle part onwards, the incantation had been changed beyond recognition. Even if it was the same magical device, different incantations often corresponded to different effects. Kale, that's really didn't know how Duque knew about this incantation and how he modified it. The prince barely understood Duke's incantation in the language of the High Elves. He changed the word rise to sink and deposit to release. However, more than 30% of the runestones had been destroyed, and most of the arcane energy buried under the forest had been used up. What else could Duque do? In Kale, that's expectations, it would be difficult to even make a fire with a runestone magic circle, let alone a flame that could incinerate 10,000 people. At this moment, in Duque's perception, the situation was completely different. Lines of data flowed down from Duque's retina like a waterfall, pouring into Duque's vision and imprinting in Duque's mental world at the same time. A large amount of knowledge poured into Duque's head like a force-feeding duck. This should have been a very uncomfortable process, but when all the knowledge was crushed into fragments of memories and continuously rotated at high speed, like rivers flowing into the sea, everything changed, importing geological data of Longsong Forest, comparing the geological conditions of the battlefield, feeding back the magic conditions into a data link, loading the strongest king terrain modification system. Authority, supreme. That's who was beside Duque, watched in astonishment as Duque's pupils gradually changed from deep black to the color of flowing mercury. A series of magic waves gradually appeared under his feet, as if the magic circuit on his body extended from his limbs to the city wall, and then from the city wall to the entire battlefield. How is this possible? Kale, that's cried out in shock. As the ancestors of magic, the biggest difference between the High Elves and the city wall was that they solidified the city wall of Silvermoon City with magic to prevent the wall from collapsing under the effects of high temperatures and low temperatures. Even the Sun King himself, who had built the city wall back then, could not allow his magic to pass through the city wall. This was because the city wall had been reinforced and solidified many times with magic. However, Duque did it. Boom. The large area where the trolls stood seemed to have experienced an incomparably violent earthquake. Suddenly, the entire area shook. Standing on the high city wall, Kale, and a few counselors of the Silvermoon Council could see the entire battlefield even more clearly. It was as if an indomitable giant beast had chomped down on the area behind the troll. A huge crescent-shaped area suddenly sank by a full 5 meters. It's not just 5 meters. It was as if the shapeless behemoth was biting down again, making the 3-kilometer-long semicircular pit even deeper. Boom! There was another loud noise. Every time a loud noise came from the ground, the crack would expand, deepen, and widen. No troll knew how deep the dark trench was, but it was already more than 30 meters wide. The trolls were horrified to find that their escape route had been cut off. Before entering the forest again, they first had to face the huge trench that could not be crossed by themselves. At this moment, Duque smiled. Kale, please. Use your flames to make the trolls jump into the trench and go to hell. Kale, eyes widened. He suddenly realized that this was the hunt that Duque was talking about. Without hesitation, Kale, activated all the magic circuits in his body. His entire body rose into the air and burst forth with a strong light that was enough to dazzle the eyes of every warrior on the battlefield. The power of the flames that flowed out of Kale's body was too terrifying. In just a few breaths, he turned into a huge and illusory fire phoenix. This huge creature that was burning with flames slowly floated down from the city wall. It pounced on its flame wings that were wider than the main gate of Silver Moon City. Every time it flapped its wings, it swept up blazing turbulence. Kale did not even have to attack. Just the power of the flames that flowed out was already like a flaming storm that could destroy half of the forest. The high elves watched as their prince flew over their heads with a ferocious might that could overturn the entire battlefield. They immediately burst into loud cheers that could overturn the clouds in the sky. Long live the Sunstrider! Long live His Highness Kale! Kale activated all the magic circuits in his body, and the various magic treasures of the Sunstrider royal family on his body immediately shone brightly. He pushed his palms forward, and a wall of fire that was more than 2 kilometers wide appeared on the battlefield. Chapter 400. Duque was also dumbfounded. He had never expected that Kale would be able to create such an exaggerated and insane wall of fire with his full strength. No, this was no longer a wall of fire. This wall of fire that could move forward should be called Wave of Fire. Ordinary earth mages couldn't cast Wave of Fire. Sky mages could probably create a wave of fire that was 20 meters wide in a short period of time. Duque calculated his limit and estimated that he wouldn't be able to withstand a width of 200 meters. That's right. A Morningstar mage could indeed act as a small nuclear reactor and produce magic power on their own. But just as its name suggested, it was only at the level of the light of the stars. Considering that Kai-Z was only a radiant moon, according to the estimation given by the system notification, it would be impressive for Kale to create a wave of fire that was 500 meters wide at most. Now that it was 2 kilometers wide, even if it was a short-term spell, it wasn't hard to imagine that the amount of magic and mental strength needed to control the spell was astronomical. Without a large pile of top-notch epic magic equipment, it was impossible to survive. As expected of a nouveau riche. No, it should be said as expected of an imperial family. The wealth of the Sunstrider Wang family, which had been passed down for nearly 7,000 years, was indeed unimaginable to outsiders. Any low-grade item that they didn't even bother with was enough to cause a civil war among the Dalian pharaoh outside. Second-generation Wang, let's be good friends. Of course, Duque, who called himself an honest and reliable gentleman, would never have any ideas about Kale. Well, it was another matter when he thought about how he had cleared Kai-Z's dungeon countless times before he transmigrated. The trolls below were miserable. No one would have thought that the runestone array could be used in this way. The runestone itself could raise a huge tornado of wind and thunder anywhere in the Long Song forest, killing all the creatures inside. Duque did the exact opposite. When he was unable to gather the power of wind and lightning, he directly drew more power from the earth vein. A dried-up ley line could easily form a huge underground hole. There wasn't a problem at first. But not long ago, this place had been tormented by all kinds of huge beastmen war machines, and Duque had drained the veins of the earth, causing the earth to lose its support. Then, under the system's calculations, it became a perfect trap. Now, all Kale had to do was force these trolls into a trap. Raging flames swept across the entire battlefield plains. The flames caused the surrounding temperature to rise, and the temperature of the air was greatly increased. Putting aside the sparks that were constantly flying in the turbulent flow, the air was so hot that even breathing it in would cause severe burns. Once the flame landed on any flammable object, it would immediately burst into flames. Under Kale's control, the fire burned everything in its path. A distant memory surfaced in the hearts of every troll. They suddenly realized that they were just like their ancestors, mercilessly driven away by the magic elves. They left the land they stood on, left the homes they lived in, and walked step by step towards death and destruction. The raging flames reminded them of the burned capital of the Amani Empire. Ah! The trolls screamed in terror. This scream was like that of their ancestors, filled with panic and despair. No, it can't be like this. Zhu Jin frantically urged the power of his wind, trying to use it to fight against Kale, that's flames. At this moment, without Kale, that's reminder, more elven powerhouses took action. The astromancer Caponia merged her flames into Kale, that's flames. Kale, that's chief astromancer Solarian, did the same thing. It wasn't just them. More members of the Silver Moon Council joined the battle, encouraging this huge wave of fire to sweep toward the trolls. Boom, boom, boom. The raging flames roasted everything. This wall of raging flames reminded the trolls of the distant Dark Age, which was passed down by word of mouth from their ancestors. At that time, a forest fire could often destroy a troll clan. Now, this fear was pressing into the depths of the hearts of every troll on the battlefield. They kept retreating because they were afraid of the flames and falling off the cliff. Nearly 50,000 trolls huddled together along the long and deep ravine. All the trolls' hearts constricted from fear, and the screams of their companions in the face of death deepened the chaos of the team. Some trolls began to be pushed down into the deep ravine. This unlucky troll waved his limbs in horror. Blood gushed out from all over his body, and his vision instantly turned from a blazing light to a pitch-black darkness. He unconsciously opened his mouth, letting the wind rush into his lungs as he fell. After falling for an unknown number of seconds, he lost consciousness under the impact of an indescribably violent force. Ah! Shrill cries came from the deep darkness, echoing continuously, making it impossible for them to judge how deep this ravine was. Panic spread further. The wave of fire was getting closer and closer. Some trolls recklessly rushed into the wave of fire, trying to rush through it to vent their final anger on the elves. But after a few steps, their bodies were charred black and turned into charcoal, kneeling in the flames. More trolls were pushed down into the ravine in panic and chaos. On the city wall, countless highborn elves who stayed behind pressed their chests excitedly, and their fair faces flushed with excitement. They stared at this scene, afraid to miss any detail. This was the end of the hateful trolls. This was the end of the trolls who had slaughtered their compatriots, their loved ones, and deserved to die 1,000 times. And at this moment, their great prince, Kale, that Sunstrider, had avenged them. They shouted crazily, unable to control themselves. Many highborn elves had already taken over the wave of fire, and Kale, that's finally put down his biggest burden. He summoned his phoenix mount, Ao, and stood in the air above the battlefield in a hovering posture. Subconsciously, he looked back at Duque, who was standing on the city wall. Duque was very calm. His pitch-black and deep eyes were like the endless starry sky, with an indifference that could decide the life and death of millions of living beings. Duque calmly watched the entire battlefield, but it gave Kale, that's the illusion that the entire Kuel Salis was under Duque's control. Surprisingly, Kale, that's didn't feel any fear or unease. On the contrary, Kale, that's actually had a feeling that the people might have a better life if the country was handed over to Duque. He didn't dare to tell anyone about this feeling, because this feeling was definitely not what a crown prince who was going to control the entire country in the future should have. Kale, that smiled and waved at Duque, but all the elves thought that the prince was waving at them. Immediately, a tsunami of cheers sounded. Chapter 401. Zhu Jin's eyes were bloodshot. He was so angry and so regretful. Why had he been able to defeat the high elves so smoothly before? Why had his 50,000 trolls been beaten like dogs after the orcs' main force left? Zhu Jin didn't know what Duque curse was. He only knew that he had done something that would make the trolls of Lordaeron unable to recover for more than a decade. Ancestor Amani, I should have trusted Orgrim. Zhu Jin roared as he fought with all his might. More and more powerful high elves besieged him. Unfortunately, he realized this too late. Prince Kale, that's Zhu Jin remembered this name purely because he was prepared to make the high elf prince's head part of his collection. Now, the owner of those eyes was looking down at him from above. The huge bird-shaped elemental creature under the prince seemed to cover half the sky. The crimson flames under its wings kept flapping, stirring up golden-red clouds of fire. The golden things that floated down from the sky like stars were actually the phoenix's spontaneously burning tail feathers. It was these feather-shaped golden lights that poured down, turning Haraz, who had transformed into a lynx, into a dead cat. His cat-shaped corpse turned into charcoal and lay in a sea of fire. The earth was burning, and so were the trolls' corpses, making creaking sounds. That was the sound of the flames burning the fat in the body. The Amani trolls were finished. The moss-fleck trolls were finished. Almost all the forest troll clans in Lordaeron had suffered heavy losses. Go! All of you go! Zhu Jin roared, ordering his elite subordinates to leave as soon as possible. Warlock Lord Malakas shouted, "Chief, what about you?" "I can't go. If you don't go, you'll all die." Zhu Jin suddenly roared and transformed. First up was Xiong Ying. He summoned a dozen or so giant tornadoes that were dozens of meters tall and forcefully withstood the flames of the two astromancers. He forced his way through the waves of fire and charged toward the elves' main formation. These weren't ordinary tornadoes. There was a strange, turbulent flow of energy in the wind. Energy turbulence. This strange power was similar to the mage's magic counter. However, magic counter could at most disrupt the stability of arcane energy and stop a mage from casting spells, but energy disturbance was completely different. The two astromancers were still able to cast powerful spells, but every time they cast a spell, they would suffer from the backlash of the turbulent energy. To their surprise, they discovered that Zhu Jin's power could penetrate most of their external defensive spells and hit the magic shields that were closest to their bodies. The two female arcane masters were taken aback. "Sasha," Duque ordered softly. Windrunners OL-3 immediately flew forward to intercept Zhu Jin. Although the eagle could summon strong winds, this form was a form that was completely against spellcasters. Sasha's high affinity with the wind allowed her graceful figure to easily move through the seemingly irregular tornadoes, dealing considerable damage to the eagle-shaped ancestral metal that was flying towards her at high speed. "Humph!" Zhu Jin spat. He transformed from a male eagle to a dragon eagle. Don't assume that both of them were eagles. They were actually two completely different life forms. The dragon eagle Zhu Jin no longer used tornadoes. Instead, he summoned huge pillars of flames and bombarded towards Sasha. Sasha was in a sorry state. Dealing with powerful spells was not her forte. However, at this moment, Prince Kale, that's made his move. Like a god of fire descending from the sky, Kale, that's landed on the empty space between Zhu Jin and the elven army on his phoenix. His mount merely flapped its wings and made all the flames within a radius of several hundred meters obey its command. They obediently and humbly lay on the ground. Zhu Jin's pupils suddenly contracted. From the twitching muscles at the corner of his eyes, one could tell how menacing his expression was under the mask. "Let me show you my new style." Fangs and claws. Zhu Jin transformed again. This time, he was a mountain cat. Zhu Jin actually attempted to circle around Kale, and continue killing towards the elven army. Everyone knew that the mountain cat form was definitely a high-speed form. If Zhu Jin was allowed to break through the defense and kill his way into the High Elves formation, there would definitely be a lot of casualties. For a moment, Kale, didn't have any good ideas about Zhu Jin. He had wanted to create a wall of flames with extremely high temperatures, but at this moment, Duque's magic message arrived. Firemen. Firemen, a special type of fire magic. Simply put, it was to condense the flames into human shapes and then let the running firemen run to the enemy and self-destruct. This wasn't a mainstream type of magic because it was too inefficient. For most mages, rather than waiting for the firemen to run over, it was more practical to just throw a fireball. Either way, these two types of magic needed to be guided, or they wouldn't be able to hit the target. Any high-level mage with common sense would instinctively reject Duque's suggestion. Kale, did as he was told. It was purely because he blindly worshipped and followed Duque. When dozens of firemen appeared behind Kale, that's a miracle happened. It seemed that the cat's unique dirty hands were acting up, or it seemed that after activating a certain skill, even Zhu Jin couldn't control his movements. The cat that Zhu Jin had transformed into, Mountain Cat, actually scratched those firemen. Bang bang bang. A series of dozens of huge explosions blew Zhu Jin up, and the huge mountain cat flew out. What's going on? No one could understand. Anyway, Prince Kale, that's had the upper hand, and everyone just cheered. Huge waves of cheers came one after another. Zhu Jin finally turned into a giant bear, attempting to resist the prince's flames and charge towards the elven army. This was obviously futile. The prince was never afraid of a head-on confrontation. He was afraid that you would slip away and disappear. 12 huge fireballs surrounded Kale, that's at the 12 o'clock position. With a light turn of his arm, 12 consecutive fireballs blasted towards Zhu Jin. Boom, 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 Zhu Jin resisted with all his might. Unfortunately, he didn't last long under the crazy bombardment of the next Elven King. 30 seconds later, the outcome of this massive battle was decided. Zhu Jin let out a wail as he was blasted away by Kale, that's like a high-flying ball. His huge bear-shaped body dissolved in midair, and finally turned into a human form as he fell. The impact of his fall was so great that he even smashed an arcane guard in an instant. However, the spikes in front of the arcane guard didn't make him feel any better, causing Zhu Jin to turn into a bloody man at the same time as he destroyed it. Dozens of elven soldiers went up and quickly tied up Zhu Jin. Chapter 402. The sound of Zhu Jin hitting the arcane guards was so loud that the entire ground seemed to let out a cry of pain at that moment. However, this was the last sound of battle on the battlefield. Apart from a few troll powerhouses who had been strengthened by the storm altar and used the power of wind to fly across the huge crack in the ground, 99% of the trolls were left behind. In the huge crack, the groans of the trolls could still be heard. It was conceivable that there wouldn't be too many trolls that survived, nor too few. The incomparably strong vitality of the trolls meant that as long as their heads and hearts weren't destroyed, they would be able to heal themselves perfectly. This wasn't important. The trolls in the crack had nowhere to escape. After they climbed out, what awaited them was death. Duque floated down from the top of the city wall with slow fall, landed accurately in front of Kale, and extended his hand to the elven prince. Congratulations, Your Highness Kale, This is a perfect counterattack. Looks like I can save my people a few hundred kilometers, Duque said loudly, his voice so loud that hundreds of people around him could hear him clearly. If the elves had suffered hundreds of casualties in exchange for the destruction of 50,000 trolls before the war with the Horde, the High Elves would definitely have shown Duque what it meant to be high. That kind of arrogant attitude of superiority couldn't be suppressed at all. Now, anyone with a bit of brains knew that this was purely Duque hanging the last fig leaf for the glory of the High Elves. A day ago, the High Elves who had been beaten like dogs were hiding in their main city. Even their last magical defense array had been broken by the Horde. They were like a young girl in thin clothes waiting helplessly in a corner to be ravaged by their enemies. Duque had made a dazzling appearance. The awe-inspiring might of repelling thousands of troops with one flag told the High Elves about the changes in the outside world, and also how terrifying Duque's power was. If not for Duque scaring away the main force of the Horde with the orcs as the core, the elves wouldn't have been able to take revenge on the trolls. If they hadn't resolved the siege as soon as possible, how could the scattered elven soldiers and civilians who were temporarily hiding in various parts of the Long Song Forest escape the ferocious extermination of the trolls? Moreover, after losing 70,000 troops, the elves could no longer straighten their backs. Kale, that was also very straightforward. He bowed to Duque on the spot. No. This is all thanks to your full support, Duque. We were able to cross the gates of hell and return to this world. Duque knew how to conduct himself, and Kale, knew how to conduct himself even better. Naturally, both the host and the guest were happy. Next up was cleaning up the battlefield and sweeping up the scattered giant demons. Aside from sending out a large number of demon spirits, Duque had nothing else to do. The cracks created by the runestone formation were almost 40 meters deep. This was a terrifying height for mortals. Most of the trolls who were forced to fall by the flames fell to their deaths. There were still quite a few giant demons who managed to avoid death by falling onto their companions. Of course, the elves would not let them go. Under Duque's instigation, they poured things like kerosene into the fire and burned those who were still alive. The healing power of the giant demons was useless in front of the flames. In fact, Duque really wanted the elves to attack from both sides and destroy Orgrim's elite troops in Cule Salis. Unfortunately, while the elves complained about the heavy losses and the lack of troops to maintain order in the country, most of them were scared out of their wits. Didn't they see the Wildhammer dwarves coming out in full force? The elves refused to move. Duque still had to move. Even if it was not the right time to fight Orgrim, he could at least not let him act recklessly. Duque called for Kudrin Wildhammer and his Griffin Knights to chase in the direction of the Horde's retreat. "Wait, I'm going too." Aurelia whistled. Under the stunned gazes of Duque and the dwarves, a group of rangers mounted the Griffin's back. "Damn it! What if a battle breaks out?" Kudrin protested loudly. "Then I'll trouble you to drop us near the top of the tree." A Windwalker ranger who didn't fall to his death in the forest. Servanas shouted loudly. Aurelia hugged Duque's waist from behind. "Thank you for solving the giant demon crisis, but I don't know why, but I'm a little worried about what Orgrim will do." This was exactly what Duque was worried about. Running away like a dog with its tail between its legs was not the style of the beastmen. The Griffin's speed was very fast. Flying at full speed at 70 to 80 kilometers per hour was not a problem. Of course, considering the Griffin's endurance and food supply, flying at 60 kilometers per hour was the most ideal. If the Griffin really flew at full speed, he would need to at least get a whole cow to replenish it. Where would he find 1,000 cows in Cule Salis? That evening, when he saw the light in the distance reaching the horizon, Duque's worst prediction appeared: a fire in the Long Song forest. It was the middle of summer, the time when forest fires were most likely to happen. From afar, dozens of flames could be seen rising from the southern part of the Long Song forest. Obviously, this was not a natural fire at all. "Orgrim, you bastard!" Aurelia's pretty face was filled with anger and sorrow, and within a few breaths, her tears were all over her face. Not only her, but all the elves in Duque's vision also showed expressions of grief and despair. Duque was silent. As a transmigrator from a metropolis, he might never learn the rangers' love for nature. He also could not understand the grief they felt after the forest was burned, as if they had lost their loved ones. It was obvious that the Horde had left after the fight with the giant demons last night. But after Orgrim had the Horde march slightly out of the Long Song forest, he aimed at the direction of the wind and set fire. The more densely packed areas were obviously the work of the Wolf Riders, and it could be seen that the fires were more concentrated. If he wasn't wrong, it would be the work of Zuluhid's Red Dragon. The rolling flames swept across the front of the forest like a huge wave. The intense heat evaporated every trace of moisture in the air, and the forest swayed like a mirage under the light of the setting sun. There were many black spots swaying back and forth in the sky, spitting out long beams of light. There was no need to guess, those were the wyverns. Although the lush Long Song forest did not lack rain in the summer, and the trees had just been soaked by the rain, they were instantly burned to ashes by the blazing hot dragon breath. The thick black smoke, coupled with the darkness of the night, began to block the sun. The flames showed no signs of stopping, and followed the hot summer wind to engulf the trees further away. Although it was not enough to destroy them instantly, it was enough to set them ablaze. The fire spread endlessly in all directions, engulfing one tree after another. It was like a plague that was spreading at high speed. Chapter 403. Almost all the griffins let out sharp screeches when the heat wave from the fire hit them head-on. Even though they were the strongest in the sky, griffins were still instinctively afraid of fire. No, it should be said that this was the instinct of most creatures. Fly to the west. The leader of the Wild Hammer Dwarves, Kudrin, quickly made a hand signal. Only about half of the Griffin Knights reacted and flew sideways with Kudrin. A considerable number of griffins had to hover or fly back to find a way out. When Duque flew to the west where the air was slightly fresher, he pulled the reins of the griffins and let them hover gently, giving him and Aurelia enough time and space to watch the terrible disaster in front of them. It was different from when Duque burned down the elven forest. At that time, the elven forest was completely occupied by the enemy. And humans did not have as many thoughts as the elves. But now it was different. When Duque squinted his eyes to reduce the strong light entering his eyes, Aurelia unconsciously tightened her grip on Duque. It was a strength that was far above that of Duque's. The strength of her arm was so strong that it felt like it could squeeze Duque's internal organs out. "Quick, stop this fire!" She shouted as if she had gone crazy and shook Duque's body forcefully. "Duque, aren't you omnipotent? Hurry up and stop this damn fire." "I can't do anything." Duque really wanted to say that. He was not a druid, nor was he the Virgin Mary, nor was he a savior. He was just a mage who was more good at destruction than creation. But listening to the mournful trembling in Aurelia's voice, Duque only felt that his heart was also broken. The giant dragons were like playing bats, hovering low in the sky in front of them. Wherever they passed, there was a raging fire spreading. Perhaps these red dragons were unwilling to listen to the orcs' control at first, but as time passed, it was clear that some of the red dragons also accepted this identity. Under the orcs' guidance, they released the tyranny in their hearts. In his field of vision, half of Cultivation Salis was burning. The flames and smoke were like a cage of destruction, tightly enveloping the home of the High Elves. Like the god of death, the flames spread from the foot of the mountain to the foot of the other mountain. It turned the places it touched into the fiercest red flames, and behind it, a remnant of darkness that was left after the flames had been completely burned. Duque was sure that even Silvery Moon City could see the fire. This was revenge. This was Orgrim's revenge. Just like how he burned the elven forest and left the horde behind. Now, Orgrim was using the same method to pay back what Duque had done to the horde. Duke's perfect strategy was now filled with pain and regret. At this moment, it was Aurelia who was begging him. "Duque, I'm sorry. I don't want to force you, but I'm just a ranger. I can't deal with this fire." Aurelia leaned her head on Duque's shoulder, and Duque saw tears flowing down her cheeks from the corner of his eye. "But I have to stop it, because the forest of Cultivation Salis is my home." Duque could not refuse. "I'll try my best." After saying this, Duque blew a small horn, the signal he had agreed with Kudrin. Kudrin raised his warhammer high and roared, "Little ones, put down our guests. We'll take care of those big lizards. Tell them who's the master of the sky." Oh, the griffin riders had their griffins slow down and fly low. Then, like dumplings being dropped into a pot, they had the agile rangers jump onto the treetops of the various trees. Finally, they formed into a formation and began to charge forward. Even though they knew that this would be accompanied by sacrifices, Duque directly jumped down, because he saw a river a few hundred meters away from the front of the fire. The river was about 5 meters wide, and the water was quite turbulent. The system genie appeared. "Host, I have to warn you that what you're doing is meaningless. The chance of you completely extinguishing this fire is 0.00001%. There are some things that don't have to be done for sure." Duke replied in a deep voice. "Sometimes, people will do things that have no real meaning just to make themselves feel better." "I'm sorry, host, I don't understand what you're saying." Duque did not continue to answer. He directly cast a spell. After a short acceleration, the 3 magic circuits in his body operated to the extreme. Sky mages could absorb elemental energy from the entire sky to strengthen their own magic. Morning stars could use this as a foundation to produce magic on a small scale. Because of the high temperature, the river had already begun to boil. The temperature of the fire was too high, and simply pouring water on it would instantly evaporate. What Duque did was not simply use water to extinguish the fire. Instead, he first extracted the fire elemental energy from the entire area. Absorb, absorb, and absorb again. Compress, compress, and compress again. Then, a huge fireball that had never been seen before emerged from Duque's palm like a mushroom cloud. The huge fireball was launched into the sky, and after rising more than 200 meters, it began to quickly dissipate because there was nothing left to burn. After extracting the fire elemental energy, the temperature of the air within a radius of several hundred meters in front of Duque plummeted, and some areas even had frost covering the ground, which was out of season. Good job. On the griffin, Aurelia unskillfully controlled Duque's griffin. But very soon, whether it was her sisters, or even the ranger she brought, they all began to fall silent. Duque was very powerful. By running at high speed and extracting the power of the fire elemental energy in a large area, and then replacing it with water elemental energy, he successfully contained a large area of forest from fire. However, his power alone was still too insignificant. So what if he prevented a 2 or 3 kilometer area from being burned? In just a short 10 minutes, the fire had already spread for hundreds of kilometers. If it wasn't for the Wildhammer dwarves' griffin riders in the distance, the area of the fire would have been even larger and more terrifying. In the distance, the winner of the massive battle that erupted in midair was quickly determined. In terms of aerial combat, the griffin, which was only above average, was at an absolute disadvantage against the red dragon, which was the tyrant in the sky. The Wildhammer dwarves used absolute numbers to make up for their lack of individual quality. According to what Duque said, the red dragons would run away on their own after dealing with the orc riders. It was obvious that the tribe had used some kind of threat or method to force the red dragons. Now, even if the riders behind the red dragons died, they would still choose to continue fighting until they received the order to retreat. Kudrin had no choice but to give the order to kill these red dragons as well. After being continuously hit by the storm warhammer, the red dragons finally could not hold on any longer. They howled and fell from midair, their bodies covered in wounds. The battle was over. Chapter 404. In fact, Orgrim, who was unwilling to accept defeat, did something else. He sent Zuluhid's dragon knights to attack the Sunwell. Unfortunately, they returned without success. The Battle of Quel'Thalas was over hastily. The invading trolls were completely annihilated. Apart from a few chief-level trolls who managed to escape with the help of the Storm Altar, not even a single egg was left. Even the troll chieftain, Zujin, was captured. Cultivation was even worse off. A preliminary count of 80,000 soldiers and 200,000 civilians died. A third of the precious Longsong forest was burned down, and this was with the help of the heavens. Otherwise, it was unknown what would have happened. On the Alliance's side, the human army under Duque's command went on an armed march. With the support of the Yao Yao, they did not fight the horde at all. On the other hand, the Wildhammer dwarves had a fierce battle with the Dragonmaw clan's Red Dragon Knights. Kudrin and his mount, Scare, had shocked everyone. The Wildhammer king had killed 9 red dragons by himself. The sentries that Duque had prepared in the north were not put to use either. When they retreated from Cultivation, the orcs split up. This also originated from the Sunwell. We can't even fight our way in. Zuluhid complained to Orgrim. It seemed like his anger was far greater than his guilt at his own incompetence. Even the dragons can't do it. Orgrim narrowed his eyes and listened attentively. Zuluhid emphasized loudly, shaking his head forcefully. I had my dragons spit out the last drop of saliva in their mouths to create dragon breath. Their flames have already enveloped the entire city. But so what? We are like fools roasting a rock. No matter how fierce the fire outside is, it will never reach the inside. I tried to let them charge in, but their claws were blocked by an invisible barrier. That's the Sunwell. Dan interrupted Zuluhid. It is the source of magic for the elves. It provides them with endless energy. Fortunately, you did not really charge in. Otherwise, the elves with the Sunwell could cast almost limitless spells and smash 1,000 fireballs into your face. Zuluhid was speechless. Orgrim, on the other hand, was deep in thought. Looks like I was right not to attack Silvery Moon. Even if the Horde gathered 100,000 people, it wouldn't be enough to take down Silver Moon City. They would have to deal with the Alliance first before they could take down the stronghold. However, putting aside the elves for now did not mean that they would not have to deal with them in the future. The elves' large-scale magic formations gave Orgrim, who only knew how to fight in melee combat, a headache. Especially after knowing that there was a sun well further north of Silver Moon City. To conquer this world, be it the elves' Silver Moon City or the Well of the Sun, they would always be a hurdle that could not be avoided. Is there a way to destroy it or exhaust its energy? Or can we control it instead? Or use the storm altar to destroy their defenses? Orgrim asked Gul'dan 3 questions in a row. A sly smile appeared on Gul'dan's face. I don't know. I'm willing to try, but I don't know what the Sunwell will be like. The storm altar was made of runestones unique to the elves, and their energy originated from the Sunwell. I can try to connect to the source of its energy through them and transfer my magic power over to destroy it or control it. But Great Chief, this will take time, a lot of time. If he really succeeded, whether it was destruction or control, Orgrim didn't even need to think to know which one Gul'dan would choose. From the bottom of his heart, Doomhammer did not want Gul'dan to control this power. However, rather than leaving the power of the Sunwell to the elves who could cast mysterious magic beyond the beastman's imagination, it was better to give it to Gul'dan. After all, Gul'dan was a beastman. It was obvious that if they were to retreat, Gul'dan would not have enough time to do all sorts of research. Seeing Orgrim's wavering, Gul'dan decided to add fuel to the fire. He humbly lowered his head. Great Chief, we cannot just leave like this. I actually have another plan for the Storm Altar. It will help the tribe to speed up the pace of conquering. I believe that it will be more beneficial for the tribe if my clan and I stay here for a while. Gul'dan used a low voice to tempt Orgrim. Orgrim furrowed his brows. He never trusted this short, ugly, and evil warlock. However, the pressure that the humans and high elves put on the tribe was too great. He had no choice but to use Gul'dan. Without the warlock, the tribe's warriors would only be like the trolls, tragically and helplessly falling under the powerful magic. He also had to admit that Gul'dan's twin-headed ogres played an important role in the Battle of Salis. It was these strengthened ogres and Galen's breakthrough that completely defeated the elves' giant arcane guards. According to the latest news, the humans had created something that could spit fire. There was nothing the valiant Grom Hellscream could do about it. The twin-headed ogre mages were different. They could use Ice Barrier while charging through the flames. It was not hard to imagine that without their help, the tribe would lose the ability to break through the Alliance's defense line. After thinking about it, Orgrim finally nodded. Do what you must. Still worried, he added to Gul'dan, but don't delay for too long. We need to concentrate our forces to quickly take down Lordaeron. After the Beastmen entered the world of Azeroth through the Dark Portal, the humans had gotten through the initial period of discomfort and repeated failures. They had shown great resilience. There were all sorts of new tactics and weapons against the Beastmen. If they still used the same method that the Blackhand Great Chief used when they first arrived in this world, it would not take long for the Beastmen to go extinct. The humans were improving, and the Beastmen had to improve as well. When they reached the northern continent of the Eastern Kingdom, which was also the Lordaeron continent, Orgrim realized that the things he had to do had changed a lot. He began to pay more attention to information. If they had enough information, the tribe wouldn't have foolishly attacked one city after another. They would also not foolishly attack the farthest Elven Kingdom just to get the trolls as an ally. The 8 countries had only attacked Stormwind City. If they attacked the other cities one by one, how long would that take? Orgrim decided to change the tribe's plan and attack the Lordaeron Kingdom directly. I won't delay for too long, Gul'dan assured Orgrim. Gul'dan assured Orgrim and grinned. If it really doesn't work, I'll make another storm altar to strengthen it and the army will come. Chapter 405. Orgrim took away almost all of the two-headed ogres in Galan, but he did not see Ghoul, Dan and his Storm Predator clan or Gugur's Twilight Hammer clan. After wandering in the mountains for 3 days, Orgrim decided to change the route of the march. He bypassed the northern sentinels and returned to the north of the hinterlands from the original settlement of the Mossy Troll clan. He was prepared to attack Lordaeron through a route that no one in the alliance could have imagined. Duque should have responded immediately. However, the rapid march over the past few days made Duque's troops quite tired. He could only order a 3-day rest. At this time, the High Elves held a banquet. A celebration banquet to celebrate the victory against the invaders. When he first heard the news, Duque felt like he was in shock. Celebration? What celebration? 300,000 High Elves died, and almost 1/3 of the High Elves perished. They only killed 50,000 trolls, and they still had the cheek to call themselves the victors of the war? Sorry. It is precisely because our losses were too heavy that Father and all the counselors agreed to hold a grand banquet to celebrate the victory and raise the morale of the people. Kale, that said to Duque with an apologetic expression, almost begging. Also, this will be the signing ceremony for Kuel Salas to officially join the Lordaeron alliance. Since it was an official joining, Duque, as the highest representative of the alliance, naturally had to attend. That feeling was like asking you to eat a fly. Do you want it fresh? Or do you want it original? They had already been beaten like a dog, yet they still wanted to pretend to be peaceful and show off their power. Wanting to save face and suffering was the best way to describe Quell, Dorii, High Elves, but the ones who suffered were the civilians. Beside him, Ilucia quietly tugged at the corner of Duque's clothes. Duque finally swallowed his anger and nodded in agreement. After waiting for Kale, that's to leave, Ilucia sighed and said, "Sorry, Duque, I know you are not used to it yet. To be honest, I grew up in a high noble family, and I am still not used to it. The decrease in the number of subjects and the burning of the territory will only mean a decrease in income. As long as the country is not destroyed, everything can be restarted. This is the way of thinking of the nobles." I understand. Duque didn't hide his disgust for the Elven Council and the nobles. Sometimes, Duque even felt that the first, second, or third war at the Dark Portal might be a good thing. Without so many foreign enemies to clean up these terrible people, Azeroth would still be a rotten and hopeless world. Duque felt very conflicted. At night, it was not yet time for the celebration banquet. Carriages pulled by beautifully decorated chocobos had filled every space in the square of the Sun Chaser Royal Court. Before seeing so many noble carriages, Duque would never have imagined that Kuel Salas had so many nobles. Each of the chocobos had been groomed until their feathers shone brightly, like proud phoenixes, raising their heads high and exuding a cold aura. One by one, elves dressed like the nobles of Stormwind stood in front of the carriages. Their clothes were luxurious and elegant, studded with gold and silver ornaments with magical effects, giving them the most elegant presence. If Ilucia hadn't whispered it, Duque wouldn't have known that these guys were just freaking coachmen. Coachman Earl Sai? Nobles of Stormwind. Do you want me to buy a box of tofu and let you drown yourselves? This extreme luxury caused Duque to be dumbstruck. The Sunstrider Royal Court, which was decorated in the palace style of the Sunstrider royal family, was ablaze with lights. The bright magic lights made the palace, which was filled with round towers and was mainly colored in white, red, and gold, look splendid. Crossing a huge red carpet that was more than 20 meters wide, Duque let Ilucia, who was attending as a female companion, hold his hand as they slowly walked up the steps. Stepping on the neat white jade stone tiles, Duque couldn't help but look up at the exquisite female elven statues on both sides of the stairs. These statues were either literary or martial, and with lifelike carving lines and passionate movements, they eulogized the greatness of the Sun Chaser Royal Court. They arrived at the entrance of the hall. Kale, that had changed into a very festive robe and was greeting every guest. To Duque's surprise, Aurelia was also wearing a very family-style emerald green court dress, accompanying Kale, that's to greet the guests. Seeing Duque come over, Aurelia raised her skirt and gave a ladylike bow. Her elegant temperament and dignified demeanor made it impossible for Duque to associate her with the wild elven ranger. Aurelia put on a sweet smile and said in her pleasant voice, "Thank you for coming, Duque. If you had been absent, all of Qul Salis would have been shamed." Duque, however, was sensitive to something. He looked at Aurelia's plump lips and bright appearance with lipstick, and unexpectedly found a trace of haze hidden in Aurelia's bright eyes. "Aurelia, what happened?" Duque said as he prepared to kiss her hand. Unexpectedly, Aurelia hugged him, passionately, and her low voice sounded in his ear, "It's nothing. It's just like you said, big people always have a helpless need to put on a show. It's just that it's my turn today." The show. Duque understood a little. If the trolls hadn't attacked, or if they had come but returned without any success, then Aurelia would have been the shame of the elves, and would have been held accountable and investigated. But the truth was that the trolls had come and turned Qul Salis upside down. In order to whitewash peace and to restore the morale of the people, the elves needed a hero to divert the public's attention. Kale, that's lost and won, and at most, his merits offset his demerits. But Aurelia was different. She had a close relationship with the Alliance, and secondly, facts had proven that she was right. Helping Aurelia become a hero would allow her to answer to the people and the Alliance at the same time. As for what she wanted to do later, she just had to keep a low profile. First, he had to deal with the current situation. Duque sighed deeply. Because there were many guests, Duque went in after a brief exchange with Aurelia. In the huge hall with a diameter of more than 1,000 meters, countless tables were set up. All kinds of sumptuous food and flowers filled the entire venue. When Duque entered, a large number of nobles had already arrived. They were holding goblets of wine and shuttling back and forth, not letting go of any opportunity to socialize. The atmosphere was so warm that it was hard to imagine that this was a tragic country that had just experienced the flames of war and had lost 1/3 of its citizens. The banquet began enthusiastically, but Duque noticed that Aurelia, one of the protagonists of the banquet, was clearly smiling but seemed to be crying. Chapter 406. This was a grand celebration banquet, and there were at least 1,000 guests present. However, there were not many people around Duque. Due to the fact that the army had been forced to retreat with a single flag, the local nobles who did not know the truth did not know who was responsible for the elves' ridiculous reversal of victory. Moreover, Duque's background was too great. He was the deputy commander of the Alliance, and all of his subordinates were kings. In theory, after Qul Salis joined, the wizards would be provided to Duque. In the end, those who dared to show their faces in front of Duque were at least local lords or counselors. Duque dealt with them with a formal smile. However, Duque could instinctively feel the contempt in their bones. At first, one or two of them could be said to be misunderstandings, but towards the end, even Kale, who was by Duque's side, did not look too good. This was because more than one counselor could not help but use their spiritual force to test Duque. They seemed to want to know how Duque, with his weak strength as a Morning Star wizard, was able to become the deputy commander of the Alliance. One had to know that unless the elven wizard Xianxia was of noble birth and had sufficient seniority, he would not even be able to become a counselor in the Silver Moon Council. Every person who made a move had their claws chopped off by Duque. It was like rock, paper, scissors. No matter what form of spiritual force you used, Duque could find a way to counter it in less than 1/10 of a second. Only then did they start to look seriously at Duque, who was too young from the perspective of humans and elves. Duque's focus was on Aurelia. With the help of the system elf's voice filter and amplification, Duque could hear what the elves around Aurelia were saying. "Niece Aurelia, I heard that you're going to serve that human lord. Are you going to get a title? Have you decided where your fief is? Sister Aurelia, are you going to marry the deputy commander of the Alliance? I'm so jealous of you." After listening for a while, Duque finally understood. This was a group of middle and low-level elven nobles, and they were somewhat related to the Windrunner family. He was different from those high and mighty upper-class nobles who flaunted themselves at their own cost. The nobles with fiefs in the southern part of the Long Song forest suffered the most this time. The forest, which had not changed for thousands of years, was burned down, and a large number of people were killed. It seemed that the royal family and the parliament members, who had also suffered heavy losses, did not intend to support these poor people. The bitter days ahead were predictable. Kuel Salis was also situated in an awkward location. It occupied the northernmost part of the continent, and bordered the continent's most powerful human kingdom, Lordaeron, in the south. There was no room for expansion at all. If they couldn't survive, the hearts of the people would naturally change. They tried their luck and came to Illyria to find out what was going on. Aurelia was embarrassed. In fact, it was only a few days ago that she decided to follow Duque. She didn't know what position she would get after the so-called transfer, and whether she would get a title or not. Of course, she knew that Duque would not give them the cold shoulder. It was just that she was too busy these days, and that thing happened. Seeing Aurelia stunned, the expressions of these relatives were different. Some were curious, some were expectant, some were smirking, some were perfunctory, some were meaningful. Most of them were pessimistic. In the human world, there had never been a precedent of giving a title to a foreign race. They should be tricked into selling their lives for the humans, right? At this time, Duque came over. When he was still a dozen steps away, Duque said with a smile, "Oh, my countess, you are here." Countess? This distinguished title belonged to Aurelia? No matter what country, a person who could get to the rank of countess could never be called a small noble. At this time, a female elf asked half-jokingly, "Honorable Grand Duke Marcus? Aurelia is our Windrunner family's most beautiful and powerful ranger general. You can't look down on her. Don't tell us that Aurelia can't even get a piece of land. How is that possible? Aurelia is the most important person to me." Duque did not hesitate. In front of these long-eared elves, he took out a certificate of land. On it was an autograph of King Lang and the royal family's fire seal. Seeing that Duque's theoretical fief was so huge, all the elves were shocked. "Well, as you wish. By the way, let me tell you, my Countess of East Elven Forest fief is here." Duque gently held Aurelia's hand with his left hand and circled the map with his right. This circle did not scare the elves to death. According to the map, this was already a forest of more than 1,000 square kilometers. How was this a countess' fief? Calling it a duke's fief was too big. Aurelia actually became a real duke of a human kingdom? This news was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. If they did not know that the old territories of Stormwind were still in a state of collapse, the elves would probably be in an uproar. However, this was also hope. Duque came quietly and left quietly, leaving behind a group of even more eager Windrunner relatives. Late at night, after the banquet ended, Duque returned to the state guest house, only to find Gavinrad stammering and scampering away near the door of the room. This could only mean one thing: Aurelia was here. The melodious sound of a harp came from the room. The ranger and the harp were the best combination. God had blessed them with the most flexible fingers, and the superb fingering required to pluck the strings was as easy as eating and drinking. However, it was different from any song that Duque had heard before. The sound of the harp in the night was indeed melodious and delicate, but it seemed to be narrating an endless sad story. "Aurelia, what happened?" Putting down the harp, Aurelia walked lightly to Duque and hugged Duque. Duque could clearly feel the rapidly expanding wetness on his shoulder. "My parents died in battle." It was a light sentence, but it was like a bolt from the blue to Duque. According to Duque's memories of Aurelia's history, the one who should have died in battle was her youngest brother, Rirus. Now that Lilith was fine, Duque had confirmed it repeatedly before the banquet. Who knew that it was her parents who had sacrificed themselves? "Didn't I repeatedly tell you to evacuate your relatives?" Duque's body trembled along with Aurelia's. "Yes, they actually arrived at Silvermoon City a long time ago, but they went back without us knowing. As a ranger lord," Aurelia choked. "I know that this is their responsibility and their honor, but I can't control myself. Tonight, I feel so uncomfortable that I'm going crazy. But I have no choice but to pretend to be the most dignified and noble. I have to put on a smile to face all the guests and deal with the distant relatives who can't live on anymore. Chapter 407. No wonder. No wonder. No wonder, Duque had heard Aurelia play the harp more than once. Most of the time, he could tell that Aurelia was singing about the beautiful life of the elves in Quell, Thurs, reminiscing about the peaceful days when they walked in the forest. Most of the time, he could tell that in order to protect this beauty and peace, Aurelia did not hesitate to risk her life. But now, the beautiful forest and her hometown were burned to the ground, and her parents died in battle. Duque had never experienced the sudden death of a loved one, and he could not understand how it felt to have a loved one who had accompanied him for thousands of years suddenly die. At this moment, Duque fell into a state of remorse and self-blame. He had never seen Aurelia's parents, and he did not imagine what kind of situation it would be after seeing them. But the Aurelia in front of him, drowned in tears and sorrow, really existed. Looking at that beautiful and sad face, Duque's self-blame in his heart grew heavier. If only I had done a few more steps, even if I had to tie them up, to ensure the safety of Aurelia's parents, then it would have been better. If only I had not allowed the tribe to attack Cuel Salis, perhaps such a tragedy would not have happened. If only, after coming to this world, especially after becoming the Alliance's deputy commander, Duque had told himself more than once that he was a man of great things. For the future of himself and Azeroth, he could not be soft-hearted. It was with such a mentality that Duque could calmly look at the life and death of tens of thousands of people, or even hundreds of thousands of people. Because in Duque's heart, these people should have died in history. I did not kill these people, but I saved more people who should have died or died tragically. For example, Lang, who should have knelt long ago, or the fourth son of the Windrunner family, who should have been killed by Talon Gorefiend. In the end, Duque was still the young transmigrator. He was also often proud of his achievements. But now, when death really happened to the people around him, Duque found that he still couldn't take it. Duque's mind was in a mess. At this moment, a slender finger pressed against Duque's lips. I'm sorry, I've always been too demanding on you. I want you, who carries the future of the world's humans, elves, and dwarves, to accompany me in my madness. I know you can't do it, but I still want you to extinguish the forest fire. Tonight, Aurelia was very weak. In front of Duque, she was no longer the smart and capable ranger general. She was not the Valkyrie on the battlefield. Instead, she was a weak woman who needed comfort. Her bright red lips parted slightly, and Duque unexpectedly kissed her. It was very, very soft to the touch, but it had a kind of inexperienced and clumsy feeling. However, Aurelia still responded positively to Duque. Duque suddenly felt that Aurelia's body was a little cold. He didn't know why. Although he knew that he was taking advantage of her, Duque had a feeling that if he let go, he would regret it for the rest of his life. Slowly, Duque's hands began to explore. At this moment, Aurelia, whose vital part was touched, suddenly tensed up. Then, her eyes gradually brightened and brightened again. It was a look of temporarily forgetting the pain and confusion in her eyes. She pursed her lips tightly and then, a little abruptly, she smiled. Damn it, I'm really not like myself now. Although she was still crying, a sincere smile appeared on her face. My name is Aurelia Windrunner, the head of the Windrunner family. The heroine of the Troll War. If I cry like a weak person for comfort, and then some bad guy takes advantage of me, then I'm too weak. Duque, don't you always call me the Great Demon King in secret? Ah. Duque shook his head decisively, refusing to admit it. Then I'll give Duque Hero a chance to challenge the Great Demon King. Remember, the chance to challenge the Great Demon King doesn't come every day. If you fail this time, you'll have to wait 1,000 years for the next chance. 1,000 years? The future Azeroth was a dangerous world that could be destroyed 100 times a year. 1,000 years, Duque decided to do it. Seeing Duque's fighting spirit, Aurelia had a crying and laughing expression. Look at your small body, I don't need to bully you in close combat. I won't attack you, and I won't leave this room. As long as you catch me, the great demon king will be at your mercy. It settled then. The battle began. At first, Aurelia was still thinking if she should go easy on him. In the end, she realized that she was thinking too much. If she couldn't attack the sorcerer's body, Duque had 10,000 ways to deal with her. The shameless Duque instantly froze the entire room. The ice kept increasing in size, quickly reducing the space in the room. Aurelia gave up after dodging a few times. She put her hands on her waist, looking like she was going to fight Duque head-on. As the most charming woman among the Windrunner sisters, her figure was also the most voluptuous. The hygel peaks on her chest perfectly displayed the beauty of the large arcs and the violence of the mass. However, when it reached the waist, it softly narrowed, and further down, it outlined another perfect arc. Aurelia crooked her finger at Duque. Suddenly, a system notification appeared. Aurelia Windrunner used, "Do you want to activate the boss battle mode?" Duque randomly clicked a yes. The host has transformed and temporarily switched to a warrior. Used touch on Aurelia. You received 10 rage points. Aurelia is trying to use her strength to suppress you. You used armor break on Aurelia. Even though Duque had only played as a warrior for a few days before he transmigrated, he knew that a warrior could quickly establish aggro on a boss and make the boss only attack them. Used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her outer armor. Used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her chest armor. Used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her crotch armor. After 3 armor break S, the warrior Duque realized that he couldn't use armor break anymore because there was no place to use armor break. At this time, Duque's attacks didn't seem to be going smoothly. Aurelia smiled lightly. Your attack was parried by Aurelia. She used counterstorm on you. Your armor value has already fallen to a dog. At this time, Duque shouted in his heart, "Hey, system elf, is there any way to increase my strength? I want to crush this woman." Host, you can try to use the magic circuit to control your body, but this will. Duque didn't hesitate for even half a second and did as he was told. Suddenly, Duque realized that his strength was completely above Aurelia's. Faced with Duque, who suddenly took the wrong medicine, Aurelia's expression changed greatly and she hurriedly tried to retreat. The boss Aurelia is trying to escape. Do you want to give chase? The system elf asked considerately. Nonsense. Of course I want to give chase. However, I really haven't seen such a stupid boss. She actually exposed her back. The next moment, Duque temporarily changed his profession to thief. He directly locked Aurelia's waist and used the thief's godly skill, backstab, on Aurelia. The system notification came again. Congratulations, you have obtained the first blood of the great demon king Aurelia. Duque, you be *starred. Aurelia scolded. Duque used his temporarily obtained strength to completely suppress Aurelia. He directly used 998 consecutive backstab on Aurelia. Chapter 408. This was a touching battle between the hero and the Demon King. At the end of the battle, the great Demon King cried. She told all her grievances, sadness, and unhappiness to the brave man who had conquered her. Then, there was the inexplicable battle between the hero and the Demon King. Until she was exhausted, the sun shone into the room. The ice around the room was like a prism, reflecting the light of dawn. As if waking up from a hangover, Aurelia pushed away the thing that was pressing down on her and making it hard for her to breathe. She looked into the distance. The room was sealed in ice. Surprisingly, there was not much cold air leaking out of the ice, indicating that the owner still had good control over the ice. Not only that, Aurelia also sensed that there were several air vents at the top of the room to prevent the person inside from suffocating to death. Looking outside through the thin ice wall, all the scenery was hazy and beautiful. Aurelia felt like she was dreaming. She forgot all her sorrow and unhappiness and was immersed in the beautiful dream of a human named Duque. Duque? Aurelia dug her fingers into her long blonde hair. Only now did she suddenly realize what had happened last night. She finally found the thing that she had pushed away and thrown to the side of the bed. Damn. Duque, what happened to you? Aurelia screamed. Duque's whole body was stiff, like a corpse that had been dead for a long time. Only his shifty eyes, which were rolling around bitterly, could see that he was still alive. Aurelia suddenly found that there were a few lines of words written with arcane energy in the air. It was written in the common language. Last night, I went overboard. In order to gain power, I used the magic circuit to strengthen my body. Now my whole body hurts. Aurelia burst out laughing. She even forgot to cover her beautiful body and let the Hyjal peaks tremble. Duque was so excited that his eyes were wide open. Unfortunately, he could only stare. Aurelia quickly wrapped herself in the blanket and carried Duque to the bed. Then she lay on her side and slept next to Duque. She gently drew circles on Duque's chest with her index finger. Of course, it was not a curse, but something to do. I'm sorry, Duque. I've completely lost my rationality these days. I used my personal relationship to force you to do all kinds of irrational things. During this period, I only remember that you are the only person who can help quell the loss, but I forgot that you are also the deputy commander of the Alliance and the Grand Duke of Stormwind City. You also shoulder the future of humanity and the future of the Stormwind Kingdom. Duque typed with arcane energy. It's okay. Helping the Elven allies is still the general direction of the Alliance, so my subordinates, my friends, and the other kings still support me. Aurelia lowered her head. This is different. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I go too far, I go too far. I will deeply reflect on myself. However, I have become very, very hateful of the Horde. I think I will eagerly participate in the war between the Alliance and the Horde until I kill all the Horde and kick those hateful green-skinned people back to their planet. On this point, we are in agreement. Only a Horde whose bones are burned clean after death is a good Horde. Duque continued typing. Then, the air rippled with silence. That's right, Duke typed an ellipsis in the air, as if he hadn't had enough. Aurelia let out a pleasant laugh like a proud phoenix. Tisk, little guy. You only overthrew the Great Demon King once, and you want to claim that you conquered the Great Demon King? You want to marry me? You want the Great Demon King to be your woman? Kid, you are still too young. I'm a windrunner? I'm the symbol of the wind. Have you ever seen the wind stay in a certain harbor? You want to have me in the future? Sure. Wait until I'm in a good mood, otherwise... Aurelia let out a triumphant laugh. Duque realized that he was still taking things for granted. What happened to the saying that if you marry a chicken, follow the chicken, and if you marry a dog, follow the dog? But on second thought, this was Aurelia Windrunner, the heroine who was qualified to have a statue in Stormwind City's King's Valley in history. If she was like those weak young ladies, she wouldn't be Aurelia, but some unknown and tragic noble daughter. Duque felt relieved. But he suddenly found that Aurelia had pulled down the blanket, once again showing her infinite beauty and a naughty smile. You little brat, you cheated and used magic to bully the Great Demon King last night, didn't you? Now, the Great Demon King you speak of is going to counterattack. With that, Duque immediately felt a terrifying pressure, as if a mountain was pressing down on him. It was as long as 3 seconds. Aurelia was actually also an idiot. Duque had gone overboard, but so had she. It was as if she wanted the pain in her body to surpass the pain in her heart. She fought with all her might last night, but now she was in excruciating pain. She just wanted to bully Duque, but the moment she touched him, she rolled on the bed in pain. In the end, the two of them stared at each other until the sun was high up in the sky before they recovered. They tidied up their clothes in embarrassment, like prisoners going to the execution ground, facing the gazes outside. The only good thing was that there weren't many people outside, just 2. One was the little handmaiden Vanessa, who was expressionless on the surface and looked at Duque as if she was looking at a villain, with disdain in her eyes. The other was Lucia, who was elegantly sipping the best black tea while waiting for Duque. Seeing Duque and Aurelia come out together, and glancing at their expressions, Xianxia seemed to have an indescribable feeling. The eldest daughter of the Barov family adjusted her mentality well. She was still the dignified and generous Xianxia, Duque's female disciple and spokesperson at this moment. Xianxia first bowed to Aurelia with the etiquette of a hostess, and then briefly explained what happened in the morning. "Prince Kale, that's came to see you this morning, master. I politely declined him on the grounds that you were using magic to communicate with the kings overnight for a war conference. In addition, there were 7 counselors who left visiting invitations and gifts, which I have temporarily put away for you. Finally, General Windsor wishes to receive your next instructions." Duque pondered for a moment. "It is also time for us to leave Cuel Salis." Duque finished and looked at Aurelia. To be honest, Duque had enough of the High Elves' arrogance and various kinds of idiocy. If it was not for the 3 Windrunner sisters who shone in history, Duque would never have tolerated the High Elves' arrogance. The eldest sister, Aurelia, was one of the 5 heroes of the expeditionary army. The second sister, Sylvanas, ruled over the forgotten in history and later became the chief of the tribe. The third sister, Windsor, was the leader of the most hardcore hawks in the alliance, the Silver Covenant, and was the vanguard against all kinds of foreign enemies and tribes. The 3 of them were the top talents, 1 in a million. If it was not for them, would Duque have come to suffer like this? However, it was time to leave now, and he had confirmed that most of these elves were fellows who deserved to die. Duque no longer had any reluctance to leave. Facing Duque's gaze, Aurelia took out a blue badge and wore it on the left shoulder of her ranger cloak. Aurelia said proudly, "I am Windrunner, the Ranger General under Grand Duke Marcus of Stormwind, Aurelia Windrunner." Chapter 409. The intensity of the war at the Dark Portal in the past 2 years was unprecedented. Although the commanders could see the decline of the Horde on several battlefields, the alliance that was on the defensive seemed to be in danger. The bronze-bearded dwarves of the southernmost Iron Furnace Fort, Kilrog Deadeye of the Bloodring clan, had changed his strategy. He began to use iron from the iron mines to forge armors for the unworthy laborers in the eyes of the tribe. He completely armed them and used the method of exchanging lives for the bronze-bearded dwarves. In the southeast of Lordaeron, the Arthi Highlands had almost completely fallen. The Torrent Castle looked like it could fall at any time. The Horde transferred a large number of new warriors and laborers through the Dark Portal. Rend Blackhand was smart for once. He gave up on attacking the Torrent Castle and let the laborers dig into the mountain. The Torrent Castle was located on the largest hill of the Arthi Highlands. Except for a few places, most of the mountain roads to the Torrent Castle were more than 45 degrees. It was easy to defend and hard to attack. But digging into the mountain hit the Torrent Castle's weak spot. Without the support of the earth, the ground outside the Torrent Castle began to collapse. The sinking ground spread in all directions, and the houses overturned. A large amount of debris poured down to the foot of the mountain. The only good thing was that the Torrent Castle was the capital of the Arather Empire. Its defense was the best in the entire continent, and even in the world. From inside to outside, there were a total of 5 walls. Even if the outermost wall collapsed, there were still 4 walls. At this rate, the Torrent Castle could still hold on for about half a year. Located between the Arthi Highlands and the Hillsbrad Hills, the Horde's offensive was very fierce. Regardless of the quality of the soldiers, the Horde had brought more than 200,000 people. Under the continuous attacks of all kinds of newly built thick and hard siege weapons, General Abendis of Lordaeron could not hold on. Now, it was the allied forces of Lordaeron, Stormwind and Alterac who were guarding the Torrent Castle. Further north, near the holy city of Stratholme, Duque was at the northern watchtower. Now, the northern fortress was facing an unknown number of Horde. Duque was not sure if Orgrim's main force was in front of him. But Duque could not do anything about it. This was because the Horde's army was in Zul Mashar, which had always been the territory of the Mossflayer trolls. No one knew how Orgrim managed to convince the remaining Mossflayer trolls to join the Horde. In any case, there were trolls, ogres, Gorin, who was known as the Great Ogre, and a large number of Red Dragon Knights. A large number of elite troops of the tribe were there. Even if Duque launched a tentative attack, he would still suffer heavy losses. Duke told Kudrin to do a reconnaissance flight, but it turned into a large-scale aerial battle that caused the sky to dim and the earth to dim. The Alliance had lost close to 300 griffins. Of course, the Horde wasn't doing too well either. More than 100 red dragons had been killed. Just like that, on almost all fronts, the Alliance was forced into a passive defensive position. Every day, human lives were disappearing with the momentum of a broken dam. The distress letters from the front line flew to the two Alliance commanders like snowflakes. In fact, the war between the Alliance and the Horde was like two ferocious beasts tearing each other apart, constantly inflicting wounds on each other. Now, it was not a matter of who could deal the fatal blow to the other, but who could last longer. The last one standing in the duel ring would be the winner. Be it Anduin or Duque, they were both in a terrible state, but they had to appease the kings. Duque did not conjure up the magic lanterns of thousands of troops. In response to King Salas of Stormguard's request for help, Duque made Dai Linjun pay a little bit of money. Through the secret passage near the coast, he sent dozens of 7-pounder cannons that were originally used on warships to Stormguard. These 7-pounder cannons greatly increased the defense of Stormguard. At least against Gorin, they were not that weak. As for King Eden of Alterac, Duque looked down on him. Damn it, the Horde has not even reached your borders yet. What do you mean by sending 10 distress letters every day? In fact, Duque also understood that when King Terinas forced a few lords to bring their weak private soldiers to join Duque, Duque had already completed the defense of the eastern plague lands in the future. And the further west they went into the densely populated areas, the stronger the defense of the kingdom of Rotterdam. Unless Orgrim and his 50,000 men could really overcome all the obstacles, it would only be a joke for them to fight their way through the entire eastern and western plague lands and cross thousands of kilometers to reach the kingdom of Rotterdam, which was located in the center of the Tirisful forest. Of course, Orgrim could also count on Grom to suddenly use the trapped horde to break through the main force of the kingdom of Rotterdam along the northern line of defense of the Silverpine forest. On the March map, no one could imagine how the horde would reach the kingdom of Rotterdam. But there was actually a third way. That was to return to the hinterlands, go west through the Poison Fog Canyon and Icewind Mound, cross the Alterac Mountains, and reach the kingdom of Rotterdam. Looking at this route, Duque was in a daze for a long time. In the end, he called Elugia over and handed her a letter that he had already written. Bring this letter to your father in Cair Darrow. Gavin Rad will accompany you. Remember, you are now the adjutant of the Alliance's deputy commander. If you are detained, if necessary, I will personally lead the army to get you back. Elugia was completely dumbfounded. What did Duke mean by this? Duke pulled Elugia over and whispered a few words into her ear. For the first time in her life, the eldest daughter of the Bara family, who had always looked calm and collected in the face of danger, fell into the deepest fear. Don't worry. Since I have foreseen it, this is just an insurance. Insurance? Elugia's lips were still pale. Don't worry. If it really happens, I have a way to turn the situation around. July 13th, Year 2 of the Dark Portal. Near Icewind Mound, the Horde's great chief Orgrim led his guards down a small mountain path towards a small valley below. It was late at night, a time when most people were already asleep. Orgrim also hated the lack of sleep. It made him seem irritable and not clear-headed. Unfortunately, there was an urgent matter waiting for him. Two tall and slender silhouettes appeared in front of Orgrim, causing his guards to jump in fright. He immediately realized that they were the troll scouts he had sent out. When it came to scouting, the agile trolls were obviously better than the clumsy and crude orcs. Therefore, when Orgrim found out that there was another group of trolls in Masazal who were unwilling to follow Zujin, and that they could be recruited with some food, Orgrim did not hesitate to recruit more than 1,000 Mossflayer trolls. Great Chief, we found the target, the troll scout said. Chapter 410. It was a valley. To be more precise, it was not a valley. It was more like a small pit. It was about 6 meters wide and 5 meters deep. It was surrounded by cliffs and rocks, forming a perfect shelter. That was probably the reason why they chose to meet here. Orgrim and his 2 most trusted and powerful guards were hiding at the edge of the pit. His troll subordinates scattered a lot of leaves and smelly things on him. As much as the great chieftain disliked these things, he and his guards put up with it. Not long after, he heard a sound. Following the direction of the sound, Orgrim saw a creature the size of an orc laborer clumsily moving towards the bottom of the valley. Orgrim gripped the Doomham in his hand tightly as he stared at the newcomer cautiously. The creature leaned against the cliff and panted heavily. Then it stood up and looked around. "Hey!" the cloaked figure called out softly. "I'm here." Orgrim replied. He stretched his body and crawled out from the pile of leaves to the empty area at the bottom of the valley. The mysterious figure stood up straight. When he got closer to the chief, his breathing quickened. Orgrim also noticed that there was a short axe hanging on the man's waist. It was a completely different item compared to the troll's junk. It was well made and had no signs of wear. It was obvious that the man had never used it before. Are you Doomhammer?" The man stammered, his body involuntarily shrinking back. "Can you speak the common language?" "I am Orgrim Doomhammer, the leader of the Blackrock clan, the chief of the tribe. I can understand your language." Orgrim used the standard common language to answer. "And are you the one who sent me this secret message?" This was a secret meeting. In theory, no third party would know about it. Unfortunately, this so-called theory was as clear as a lighthouse in the dark to a certain shameless transmigrator. In the hastily built northern fortress, Duque was sitting in the highest room in the highest tower. People in this era did not have the concept of ventilation. Duque only felt comfortable when he was at a high place. Duque lightly tapped the table with his index finger as he felt the cold wind that almost forced its way in through the firing hole. A cold breeze blew past Duque's back. Duque didn't even turn his head to know who it was. "Yo, my dear, how was your harvest today?" Aurelia's face reddened. She pretended to be indifferent and snorted, "Humph. Who's your darling?" Duque facepalmed. He was also puzzled. How could a mature and beautiful domineering woman suddenly change into a tsundere? "But judging from your expression, you must have had a good harvest, right?" "Fortunately, I killed a few twin-headed ogres with my double arrow. Now they've all retreated into the mountain paths." The twin-headed ogre was very difficult to deal with. Not only was its skin thick enough to block ordinary swords, but it also had 2 heads and 3 hearts. Either one of its heads or all 3 hearts were pierced through. Otherwise, the ogre would not die. Duque had seen it with his own eyes. An ogre whose chest had been pierced by 2 crossbow bolts struggled to use a large wooden stick to break the crossbow bolts that were as thick as a human's arm. It got up and charged towards the humans for hundreds of meters before it was surrounded by a large group of soldiers with steel pikes. It was stabbed dozens of times before it died. Only someone like Aurelia, who had stepped into the realm of heroes, could deal with the twin-headed ogre easily. "Good job, kill more of them. It'll be much easier for us in the future." "Humph. It's your fault for not letting us in." Duque laughed. "I'm just afraid that you guys will kill them all too quickly. Then I won't be able to ask Tarinas for more troops." Duque's way of doing things was a bit like raising bandits to protect himself. It was because of the threat of the horde that Duque and Tarinas were able to force the lords of the eastern part of Lordaeron to pay up. These bastards knew that the Silver Pine Forest was under threat, but they were still slacking off. They didn't want to pay up, but they didn't want to. Now that the tribe was almost at their doorstep, these people panicked and hurriedly conscripted soldiers and paid up. Duque had all the manpower and money he wanted. Unfortunately, these lords were too late in mobilizing. They had gathered more than 40,000 people, but Duke found that only 1,000 of them were professional soldiers, less than 5,000 were militia who had received basic military training, and the remaining 30,000 were all farmers who had just washed their feet in the fields. The only good thing was that Lordaeron was so damn rich that they gave them 50,000 sets of armor and swords without any hesitation. These days, Duque had sent almost all of his subordinates who knew how to train soldiers to train these farmers. Aurelia didn't care either. She, her sisters, and more than 500 elven rangers slaughtered Zumashar's tribe every day. They only retreated when the horde sent out their wyverns. Hearing Duque say that he was afraid that they would wipe out the entire tribe, Aurelia couldn't take it anymore. Hey, aren't there more than 50,000 horde's main force inside? Orgrim ran away long ago. There's nothing inside except for less than 3,000 elites. Huh! Aurelia exclaimed, and then her expression turned serious. Then why don't you go after the horde? It's not that I don't want to go, but I don't want to. Duque took out a very official letter. Aurelia glanced at it. Your Majesty, Eden thinks that Alterac is not threatened by the Horde's army and refuses to let the Alliance in? The main force of the Horde is in Alterac. The female ranger was instantly agitated. What the hell? Why won't Eden let us in? Is he an idiot? Is he as arrogant as those damned Silver Moon counselors? How can a small mountain kingdom be so arrogant? Duque didn't say anything. He just opened a few magic images for Aurelia. When Illyria saw this, she immediately covered her mouth and cried out, "How tragic! Yes, very tragic." These images showed the tragic situation in various parts of Lordaeron. The desolate land was dead silent. The land was an intoxicating green, but there were no signs of birds or beasts. On the image was a huge human town. Now, a large number of scavengers were gathering. Vultures, crows, wild dogs, maggots. There wasn't a single intact wall in the huge town, let alone a roof. The corpses of Alliance warriors were nailed to the walls with crude spears. Judging from their armor, they had all died in a fierce battle. But their corpses were desecrated. It was obvious that the Horde beastmen had nailed them after they died. Chapter 411. In another scene, it was the once beautiful silver pine forest. All the trees had either been burned or chopped down to the last. Between the two huge camps, there was a dead, uninhabited area for more than 5 kilometers. The earth was completely scorched, and so were the corpses. There were rarely any corpses on the battlefield that weren't black. The fire burned almost everything. Any corpses that weren't collected on the same day would be burnt in the battle the next day. Almost everything was burned by the fire. Any corpses that weren't collected on the same day would be burnt in the battle the next day. Aurelia couldn't take it anymore. You're just going to leave your compatriots' corpses in the wilderness? Many times, the tribes attacked the farmers who collected the corpses, and even the ogres ate the farmers alive. Aurelia was disgusted. Apart from the Dalajan and Alterac, almost all the countries in the Alliance have been affected by the war. Every country has suffered great losses. Because of the conscription, a lot of land is unfarmed. It's not hard to imagine that the coming winter will be terrible. The elf's long eyebrows drooped. Then what happened to our people? Duque was satisfied that the beautiful elf used the word our. He waved his hand. Come here. Let's talk. I'm warning you, you're not allowed to freeze the road, Illyria added with a lingering fear. Duque was a little embarrassed. As long as you don't run away. Ever since that night in the state guest house, Aurelia seemed to have a shadow in her heart. She refused to let Duque follow her, and whenever Duque made a move, she would run away quickly. Promise me first, Aurelia emphasized. Okay, I won't force you. Duque made a gesture of surrender. Only then did Aurelia sit down. Duque said in a low voice, actually, the situation in Stormwind is better than in most countries. Aurelia found it odd. Duque pointed at the map and said, the Hillsbrad Hills are one of the few areas that have not been affected by the war. Even though we have more than 600,000 refugees here, after we turn all the grasslands into fertile fields, we can basically have 80% of us become self-sufficient. Aurelia was about to ask what to do with the remaining 20%, but she suddenly realized that Duque was pointing at the western wilderness of the old Stormwind territory. Yes, this is the place. Duque smiled mysteriously. The beastmen are a hunting race. They like to eat meat. On their planet, there are many huge and extremely large prey. Usually, one is enough to feed hundreds of people for a few days. Therefore, in their eyes, only lands with large amounts of wild prey were good territories. The western wilderness is too barren for them. When Duque said this, Aurelia couldn't help but burst into laughter. She had been to the western wilderness. Other than having more small monsters such as gnolls and wild wolves, the open plains were definitely the best place for humans to farm. The Horde prefers the elven forest, so when I asked my subordinate Edwin Van Cleef to build a base behind the enemy lines, he forbade everyone from going near the elven forest to farm. A large number of sentries and warning systems were set up 100 kilometers away from the forest. The area 200 kilometers away from the forest up to the sea is the planting area. Duque took out a report and said, "This is the list of summer grain harvests. It's a pretty good result, enough for 600,000 people to eat for a year." Aurelia's beautiful eyes sparkled. Farming under the eyes of the beastmen, Duque had thought of it and even done it. In order to prevent the grain from spoiling due to moisture during shipping, I also invented a method to transport the grain in rubber bags after it is dried. This can reduce most of the wastage on the sea. Previously, every bag of wheat would spoil on the way. Now, only one bag spoils for every 10 bags. Sitting in front of Duque, Aurelia rested her elbows on her knees and cupped her face in her hands. She stared at Duque and said, "I really don't know where you get so many ideas from. Sigh, it's because you're so outstanding that I thought you were omnipotent." Duque coughed dryly. "I'm not the god of creation. All right, in your expectations, can we kill all the Horde?" Duque spread his hands and admitted, "We can win, but we can't kill them all. I've calculated that even if you kill every orc in the world of Azeroth, there are at least 2 million tribes on the planet called Draenor opposite the Dark Portal." Aurelia's expression was a little gloomy. "However, I will let the flag of the Alliance be planted in every corner of Azeroth as much as possible." At this time, a slim figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Aurelia frowned and said, "Servanas, how many times have I told you that our identities are different now? You have to knock on the door to see Duque." "I really want to knock, but what if I miss something good?" Queen Sylvanas had a sly smile on her face. Aurelia blushed and bit her lip gently. "Sister, that's enough." Duque smiled and asked, "Servanas, what's the matter?" "Nothing, I just want to confirm whether our Windrunner family's ranger is your free mercenary, or is he really your vassal?" "Sister, don't cause trouble for Duque." Aurelia was a little anxious. She thought that Duque was just helping her out that day. After all, in the human kingdom, there had never been a precedent of conferring a high elf as a hereditary noble. Queen Sylvanas shrugged and said, "We have more than 200 people joining. Many of them are just looking for hope. It's not like I want to ask. It's fine as long as I have a forest." "Then I'll just give it to you all." Duque was prepared and took out a document. "Can one of you please call Sasha and Lilith over as well?" The Windrunner sisters were dumbfounded. This was a conferring document personally signed by King Lang Rin. As an almost independent duke, Duque had the power to confer titles below Baron, but viscounts and counts had to be approved by the king. In this era, the nobles were the vassals of the king's vassals, not the king's vassals. Duque could have no more than 3 counts as his direct vassals, and Duque's vassals did not have to follow the king's orders. The Windrunner sisters did not expect Duque to move so quickly and actually get the document approved. Aurelia was the Countess of the East Elven Forest. Servanas was the Countess of the East Twilight Forest. Sasha's fief was the original Steel Lake, now Wind Lake, so she was the Countess of Wind Lake. Lilith's fief was the Blackwell Pumpkin Farm, so she was the Baroness of Blackwell. All hereditary titles. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.